Chapter 428. As she spoke, Hellion Wei Wei did not look at the two people whose faces had suddenly turned pale. Instead, she lowered her eyes and stroked little Seven's head. Go and invite Madame Liao over. I'll give her a gift so that she can recognize someone. There's no need for the seventh prince to make an extra trip. A confident female voice came from the crowd, with the unique fire of a middle-aged woman. Princess, please continue, I can hear everything. Hellion Wei Wei raised her eyes and looked at the figure. Her voice was faint as she said, since Madame Liao is here too, then I will say whatever I want to say. I have a few letters here that clearly state what Liao Wuliang and Hellion Jiao Air have been doing for the past 2 days. Both of them are in love and both of them are very happy. When Hellion Vivian spoke until here, everyone had already understood. Their gazes shifted to Hellion Jiao, full of contempt and ridicule. I didn't expect Hellion Jiao to be this kind of person. God, that Liao Wuliang is more than 10 years older than her. More than 10 years older, don't forget, Liao and Hellion Jiao studied under the same master. Usually when Hellion Jiao sees Liao Wuliang, she has to call him uncle. I didn't expect the two of them to be together, it's disgusting. I've never seen such a despicable woman. That man is not a good person either. Madame Liao listened to the words around her. She couldn't bear it anymore. He had a bad temper. When she was with Liao Wuliang, it was because she liked him and her family was powerful that the two of them got together. For so many years, Liao Wuliang was able to get to where he was today because of her family's help. She did not expect that he dared to do such a dirty thing behind her back. More importantly, the other party was the Hellion Jiao whom she had watched grow up. Thinking of this, Madame Liao's body shook violently. She didn't look at the letter in Hellion Vivian's hand and rushed directly to Hellion Jiao. Madame Liao reached out and grabbed Hellion Jiao's hair, pulling it hard. Are you shameless? Is that what your mother taught you? Who told you to go around seducing men? It hurts. Let go of me. Hellion Jiao just wanted to find a hole and hide in it. She never thought that Hellion Vivian would know about her relationship with Liao Wuliang, and even announced it in such a way. A great sense of panic overwhelmed her. What should she do in the future? How was she supposed to get married? Even if she was the reincarnation of the Phoenix girl, who would marry her? Thinking of this, the Hellion Jiao struggled even harder. Without thinking, she retaliated. I told you to let go of me. Didn't you hear me? Hellion Vivian, you've wronged me. You're spreading rumors about me. You just can't bear to see me doing well. If you have the ability, then pull this shrew away from me. Let's face each other. Who are you calling a shrew, you little bitch? When Madame Liao heard Hellion Jiao's words, she exerted even more strength in her hands. She pulled a handful of her hair off. Hellion Jiao was in extreme pain. She directly used all of her martial qi and kicked her to the ground. Madame Liao was in pain. She clutched her stomach and fell to the ground, crying and screaming. From the beginning to the end, Hellion Vivian just looked at this scene indifferently with a cold look in her eyes. Lord Liao was in the middle trying to stop her. His official robe was in a mess, even his hat was tilted to one side. He wanted to help Madame Liao up, but was pushed to the side by Madame Liao. Then he took a heavy step back. Then he felt a black shadow coming from behind him. The pressure was so strong that he didn't need to turn around to know who was behind him. Liao Wuliang, you've done well. It was just a few words and there was a smile between the lips. But the evil murderous aura that surged out from the man's eyes made him kneel on the ground in fear. Bang bang bang. Kowtout. Your Highness, please spare me. This official didn't do it on purpose. This official didn't know that it would be the princess. As he said, he pointed at Hellion Jiao. It's all her fault. She seduced this official. This official was just blinded by lust. Before Liao Wuliang could finish the word blinded, Hellion Jiao tore at him. You disgusting old man, how dare you say that I seduced you? It was you who kept using your eyes to look at me. If it wasn't to get rid of others, do you think I would be nice to you? Hellion Jiao had already started to shoot her mouth off to the point that even she herself didn't know what she was saying anymore. The current her didn't have the appearance of the capital's most talented girl from before. That exquisite face already lost its makeup, and her hair was disheveled like a living lunatic. Bailey Jiaju's tall and slender figure stood there, the cloak on his body fluttering in the wind. His posture was calm and elegant, his eyes slowly swept over the man and woman who were about to twist into a ball. His voice was cold as he issued an order. Take all of them away and kill them. Kill. Kill. After hearing these two words, not only Helian Jiaoer and Liao Wuliang stopped, but even Madame Liao stopped crying. She wiped the tears from the corner of her eyes and crawled toward Beligaju. Your Highness, although my husband is also at fault, he didn't know that it was the princess. If he knew, he definitely wouldn't dare to do this. The one who really wants to hurt the princess is that little bitch. My husband was just framed by her. You mean to say that a beauty who is not the princess can be framed at will? Beligaju glanced at the corner of his clothes that was touched by Madame Liao. His long eyebrows frowned and the temperature in his eyes became a few degrees colder. Take them away and kill them. Madame Liao was stunned and fell to the ground. She watched Liao Wuliang and that little bitch Helian Jiaoer being dragged away together. She was completely dumbfounded. Helian Jiaoer tossed her limbs and shouted at the top of her voice, I want to see my mother, I want to see my grandfather. Your Highness, you can't kill me like this. You will regret it. Don't forget, I am the reincarnation of the Phoenix Girl. If I die, the War Dragon Empire will be destroyed. Do you want to be the heir of a destroyed empire? Probably because Helian Jiaoer's voice was too loud, the shadow guards subconsciously stopped their actions and looked at His Highness. Beligaju slowly brushed his outer clothes. His tone was neither fast nor slow. He slightly raised his eyes as if he was born with indifference. It was an indifference that looked down on all living beings. With a cold voice, it only said one word, kill. Everyone also felt that Helian Jiaoer should be killed. Such a woman is the reincarnation of the Phoenix Girl. That's not enough to make them feel ashamed. Madame Liao didn't want her husband to die. Seeing that Beligaju's side didn't work, she crawled to Helian Vivian's side. Princess, you are a reasonable person, my husband just couldn't control himself. Chapter 429. Madame Liao. Helian Weiwei's voice slowly interrupted her. Liao Wuliang is an official of the imperial court, but he used the power in his hands to persecute the harem girls on behalf of others. Just based on this point alone, his head should be chopped off. This is not something that can be controlled. Helian Vivian paused and said clearly, back then when my mother's husband was snatched away by your good friend Su Yenemo, what did you say? You didn't care if my mother was seriously injured, went to the general's residence, pointed at my mother, and asked my mother to give up her position to your good friend. Madame Liao, after so many years, you lived a carefree life, but when my mother was mentioned, you scolded her as a jealous woman. How you and Su Yenemo framed my mother, the heavens are watching and people are living. It was not that he did not want to take revenge, but that the time had not yet come. Now your retribution is here, so take it well. Otherwise, how can you be worthy of the gift I gave you? Madame Liao's expression became worse as she listened, as if she was angry and embarrassed. Her chest churned and blood overflowed from the corner of her mouth. Only now did she understand that the reason why Helian Weiwei did this was merely for revenge. She wanted to deal with them the same way they treated her mother. Retribution. All of this was really retribution. Madame Liao fell heavily to the ground and no longer said anything. As if she had lost her mind, she stared blankly at a point in the distance, crying and laughing at the same time. Eunuch Sun directly asked someone to send her back to the Liao residence, so that His Highness and the princess would not see her. After such a scene, everyone was shocked. Not only because of Helian Vivian's appearance and talent. Also, the thing that they believed in back then was actually false. Master Helian, who was regarded as a jealous woman, was the most miserable one. The true love that they pitted turned out to be a pair of scum and a bitch. And Madame Liao, in their hearts, Madame Liao had always been the image of fighting for justice for others. Unexpectedly, she was not fighting for justice, but because her own people were in the wrong, she wanted to slander others first. At that moment, some people were silent. Especially when they saw the girl standing on the stage facing the wind. They felt guilty from the bottom of their hearts. There were also some people who did not care about this at all, such as Yun Biluo. He was very smart. She knew that in this situation, it was useless for her to say anything. She might even get herself into trouble. Therefore, she lowered her eyes at the right time, minimizing her presence as much as possible. Her hands clenched tighter and tighter. Everything had been planned out well. Yun Biluo did not expect that the Helian Jiaoer would be taken away because of this. Now Helian Vivian had won. She didn't even have the chance to be a concubine anymore. I declare. The winner this time is the third princess consort, Helian Vivian. Eunuch Sun shouted excitedly. In other words, His Highness didn't need to have a secondary consort. In the end, it was still the princess consort who was more powerful. Eunuch's son thought happily, only to find that as soon as his voice fell, an unknown uproar came from the crowd. What is that? It looks like roses? So many roses. 10 cars. Wait. It doesn't look like just roses? And weapons? Just when the crowd was still confused, Hellion Vivian leaped. Her palms moved slightly and all the wind obeyed her command. A breeze blew and rose petals flew into the sky along with her robe. When the petals rose, her left hand was in the pocket of her robe lazily, and her right hand was holding a big bouquet of roses. Her long chestnut hair was evenly spread over her beautiful face, and her small earlobes were adorned with shiny silver studs. Beligaju raised his eyebrows and looked at her. There was a slight curve at the corner of his mouth, with a seductive look of confusion. Hellion Vivian looked at him and smiled faintly. She knelt on the ground handsomely. All the petals moved with her movements, like a shower of flowers flying and dazzling. At that moment, Beligaju seemed to hear the beating of his blood. What is she doing? Everyone was stunned by the scene in front of them. As long as they stretched out their hands, they would be able to touch the beautiful rose petals. The fragrance of the flowers was everywhere and it felt like they were in a dream. Most importantly, why did the princess consort hold a big bouquet of roses and kneel in front of the third prince? Eunuch's son didn't understand, so he gave a look to the little seventh prince, hoping that his little master would tell him something. But, from the beginning, the seventh prince only had eyes for food. Now he was like a little tiger waiting for an opportunity, looking at the petals that were close to him. Which one would he grab to eat? In the whole world, perhaps only young Master Hay knew what Hellion Vivian was thinking. It was just to chase after his wife. You didn't hear wrongly, it was to chase after his wife. Cough. Hellion Vivian first cleared her throat, then laughed. Her midnight eyes had an indescribable affection. I have something to give you. If you accept it, you will be mine in the future. No matter if you are poor or rich, no matter if you live or die, you can only belong to me. How about it? Beligaju looked at her. His originally cold eyes gradually became as clear as spring water, as pure and innocent as an angel. He didn't say yes or no. At this time, Heizei couldn't hold back anymore. When he heard Hellion Vivian finally ask, he hurriedly shouted, "Accept her. Accept her." He didn't know if it was because he shouted this sentence. Even more blessings rang out from all directions. Beligaju's lips curled up, and his eyes had a meaningful black-bellied look. All right, I will let you monopolize me. Tonight, I will let you monopolize me. I knew that the proposal was definitely a killer move to chase after his wife. Hellion Vivian smiled as she took out a small black suede box from her pocket and opened it, revealing 2 thin white gold rings. The rings weren't inlaid with any jewels. There was only a twisted wave in the middle, one to the left and one to the right. When the 2 overlapped, it just happened to be a small white gold heart. She was just about to put it on Beligaju when he picked her up. Her long black hair fell vertically along with the cloak, sweeping across the cold stairs and expensive carpet. In an instant, discussions and exclamations sounded like a tide, covering all the prosperity in this world. Because they simply couldn't believe what they saw. That godlike existence of a man. Their most noble and indifferent royal family actually took the initiative to carry a woman. Hellion Vivian naturally felt these burning gazes. She helplessly buried her head in the man's fragrant chest. Chapter 430. Beligaju hugged the person leaning against the bookshelf. As proud as he was, he would never tell the person in his arms that he was the one who couldn't let go. It was like a person who had been crawling in the dark for a long time suddenly coming into contact with the first ray of sunlight. It would be scorching and dazzling. Instinctively, he wanted to hold on tight and never let go. The fierce collision brought out a sweet numbness that made Hellion Vivian tighten her grip on the stack of books. The rice paper fell all over the floor. She could hear the noise behind her, but she couldn't care less. Ultimate happiness was more important than anything else. Understanding each other made them closer. They even fell in love with the feeling of being so close to each other. The servants outside were also smart. They pretended not to hear anything even if they heard anything. There were also ministers who came to look for them. After all, such a big thing happened outside and the Hellion Jiaoer was beheaded just like that. Whether it was the general's residence or Prime Minister Su's side, it would not be peaceful. However, those who dared to say anything to Beligaju were Helian Jiawer, after all, had committed the crime of deliberately killing the princess. Apart from the elders of the 4 influential families, no matter how much trouble the rest of them made, they would not be able to stir up any big waves. Su Yenamo was about to cry her eyes out. She couldn't even enter the palace. It had only been 2 months, but the Su family had unknowingly fallen to such a state. Madame Su slowly realized that the power that once belonged to her was disappearing bit by bit. She originally thought that she didn't have to care about Helian Vivian at all. Even if she had Marshal Qi, even if she had become the 3rd princess consort. However, she was just a little orphan. How could she fight against monstrous power? She didn't expect that she would be so steady. First, she cut off her source of income in Jiangnan. Then she used the weapon manufacturing incident to give her father a huge setback. Since that day, the 3 words, Prime Minister Suk, would cause a burst of laughter in the imperial court. Now that little bastard actually. How dare he kill her most precious daughter? Su Yenmo's eyes reddened. Everything happened too quickly. They didn't have time to think of a solution or use their connections. What could be more cruel than a white-haired person sending off a black-haired person before her own death? It was all because of that little bastard. If it wasn't for her, how could the mother and daughter have fallen to such a state? One died in the Yellow Springs while the other lost his reputation. She must make that little bastard pay the price. Didn't she want to come back? She just wouldn't let her have her way. Suan, go and make the arrangements. Use all the connections you have with my father. I want to know the current general of the hidden army. No matter how much money you have to spend, find him for me. Yes. Also, go to the elders of the various clans and ask them if there should be an explanation for the death of the Phoenix girl. Yes. After you're done with this, go to the stewards of the Helian family and make sure that they stand on Master's side during the clan meeting. I want to see with my own eyes that little bastard get chased out of this house like a stray dog. Yes, madam. After Suan left, Su Yenmo's entire face was twisted with hatred. Now she didn't want anything else but to let Helian Vivian have a taste of what it means to lose. It was night and the fog was thick. In the bustling long alley, the people were gradually disappearing, leaving only a tall and straight shadow. That person was wearing a white robe and behind him was a little person carrying a gourd. Master. The little person couldn't help but raise his head to look at his expression. He then reached out and touched his finger. It was so cold. The little person couldn't help but worry. Master, let's go back. His master had been standing here for a whole day. If he continued to stand there, his body wouldn't be able to take it. The man coughed softly. His ink-like eyes looked like they could overflow with water, gentle and clean. Did you see that just now? Cough, she was proposing to him. Master. The little person hurriedly said, Master, you said before that she hasn't fully awakened yet. Wait until the day she really wakes up, she'll recognize you. The man laughed softly and reached out to support his forehead. A storm swept in from behind him. The dark clouds were mixed with too much resentment. Go, think of a way to wake her up. Yes, master. Scarlet eyes filled every corner of the street. That kind of evil and gloomy foreordained that there would be no peace in the future. Helian Weiwei woke up from a nightmare. She absent-mindedly looked at the person lying beside her. That handsome face under the thin light of dawn seemed to have become somewhat unreal. Helian Vivian looked at him for a while, then raised her finger and poked. Beligaju's long eyebrows furrowed. Just as he was about to tell those who disturbed his peace to scram just like before. As soon as he opened his eyes, he saw Helian Vivian in his arms. A man who had just woken up was the sexiest and deadliest. Helian Vivian didn't fully understand this saying before. Now that she saw His Highness, she realized that there was actually a man in this world who made her want to pounce on him the moment she saw him. What do you want to eat later? Beligaju moved her finger over and kissed it. Helian Vivian began to think about this question seriously. In the end, she gave Beligaju a difficult question. I want to eat tiramisu. What's that? Beligaju raised his eyebrows. He had never heard of it before. Helian Vivian licked her thin lips and explained, it's a kind of cake. When it enters the mouth, it's soft, sweet and a little bitter. I want to eat it. Soft, sweet and a little astringent? Bailey Jiaju looked at her. Suddenly, he leaned over and kissed her lips. This. Hellion Vivian smiled and kissed him back. No, but I don't think you can buy it here. Let's eat apricot cake. It's the same. Beligaju agreed, but he didn't think so in his heart. Hellion Vivian's words let him know what the place she used to live was like. There was a snack called tiramisu, but there was no such thing here. Beligaju's eyes darkened and he tightened his grip on her. Hellion Vivian took a bite of the apricot cake and looked at him with puffed cheeks. What's wrong? Nothing. Beligaju knew that she was starving and the two of them didn't leave the bed. The snack box was at hand and there were many snacks in it. He wiped the crumbs from the corner of her mouth. When she was eating, she didn't forget to feed him a bite and said, "This one is more delicious." Basically, he ate whatever she gave him. When Eunuch Sun saw this, he was amazed in his heart. His Highness didn't like to eat at the same table with others since he was young. When he grew up, which one of them didn't use the most luxurious things? Now he was not picky about food, was easy to serve and was cured of his misophobia. It should be celebrated by the whole country. But Chapter 431. Eunuch Sun found that he was wrong. His Highness was only obsessed with the princess. When it came to them, it was the same. Get rid of them, don't get blood everywhere. Beligaju stood outside the palace and wiped his fingers with a white handkerchief. He looked at the people kneeling on the ground. In the future, don't let this Highness hear the words bring disaster to the country and its people. Yes, yes. The eunuchs in charge were so scared that their legs turned to jelly. When they looked at the face of the royal prince, they saw that his expression changed every minute. That faint smile, it was obvious that the princess had come. They knew the rules and immediately retreated. Hellion Vivian's mouth twitched. Was she that ugly? When they saw her, it was like they had seen a ghost. She had clearly recovered her appearance. What's the matter with these eunuchs? Hellion Vivian asked a certain Highness who was standing on the side. Beligaju pulled her over and said in a calm voice, "They're probably in a hurry to go back and eat." Hellion Wei. Please, this lie of yours is too obvious, okay? Bailey Jiaju smiled and kissed Hellion Wei's forehead as she squinted her eyes. He laughed softly and said, "I'll carry you inside. I'm sure you'll like the lunch I made today." Hellion Vivian was a person who knew how to enjoy life. She was a bit tired after staying up so late yesterday. Plus, there was nothing to do in the palace. When she read novels, it always mentioned that there were all kinds of chaos in the palace, all kinds of battles, all kinds of fights, and all kinds of disturbances. She wanted to show off her domineering aura at the right time and move a certain someone. Unexpectedly, the palace was as peaceful as the villa she used to live in. She basically didn't have to do anything every day. She only needed to enjoy life. Every day she would play with her martial arts and pistols, tease Eunuch Sun, and watch Shao Qi do a hip dance. There was no better life than this. Of course, there were always those who didn't know better. Hellion Vivian looked at the paper in her hand and her thin lips curled up. Since these two want to get close to the hidden army so badly, let's give them some benefits. Yes. The man in black lowered his eyes. Hellion Vivian waved her hand and dismissed him. When she looked up again, Beligaju had just finished washing his hands. His Highness had to wash his hands countless times a day. Thanks to his habit, she was free to do something else. Otherwise, apart from eating, he would only be sleeping. She couldn't help but suspect that his Highness was raising her like this. Was he planning to slaughter her like a little pig and stew her into soup one day? Beligaju heard her thoughts and smiled evilly. You're like this. Even if you're cooked and eaten, it's not as tasty as it is now. Don't let your imagination run wild. More. Why did she feel like she was being attacked again? Hellion Vivian didn't feel uncomfortable being held in Beligaju's arms. Anyway, she was used to it. These 2 days he carried her here and there. His posture was so handsome that she was happy and relaxed. When it came to things like being fed, Beligaju treated her like he was raising a daughter. He couldn't eat this, eat less that, eat more fruits and so on. Often Hellion Vivian would feel sleepy as she ate. She yawned and said, "I'm not full yet." Beligaju hugged Hellion Vivian and closed his eyes. His voice was clear and noble. "If you want to sleep, I'll ask them to make red bean pies for you later." Hellion Vivian nodded and closed her eyes. "Pies are good. I love them, yes. I love them too." Little Seventh Prince stood beside the bed and nodded his head heavily. Beligaju got up and put his outer robe on Hellion Vivian, who was sleeping soundly. He looked at Little Seventh Prince condescendingly. "What's the matter? Third brother, I also want to eat red bean pies. Little seventh prince vigorously fought for his own benefits. Beligaju slowly buttoned his shirt. His voice was unhurried. If you don't say what's the matter, you won't have a share of the pies. Little black that I picked up some time ago is gone. The little black that little seventh prince mentioned was the very mighty and domineering magical beast that could flatten the entire White Academy with a stomp of its feet. Beligaju picked him up and put him on the wooden chair. It's injured. Of course it will go back. I haven't fed it dragon meat yet. Little seventh prince expressed that he was very unwilling to accept this outcome. I still want to ride it and go to the deep sea to hunt dragons. Beligaju glanced at him. You want to grow out those 2 teeth of yours before you think about hunting dragons. Little seventh prince was recently growing out his teeth. When he smiled, one could see the missing part. That scene was very comical. All the servants found it funny when they saw it. But no one dared to mention it. Really, no one dared to mention it. They were afraid that this little tiger would directly bite them if it was unhappy. Don't look at how seventh prince was soft and cute in front of Master and Princess Consort. But usually he was just a little poker face. He was even harder to deal with than Master. Of course, in fact, if he really made seventh prince unhappy, he could completely use delicious food to deal with him. But to say the matter of his missing teeth so straightforwardly like now, they didn't know if seventh prince could bear it. Eunuch's son looked at his little master with pity in his eyes. He really couldn't bear it and came up to coax him. Seventh prince, why don't you go with this servant to the imperial kitchen to see if the fish you caught this morning is ready? Haven't you always wanted to eat fish? Little seventh prince looked up at the sky sadly. After thinking carefully, he said expressionlessly, all right, that's the only way. He couldn't beat third brother. Then let's go, seventh prince. Eunuch's son stretched out a hand. Little seventh prince also stretched out his hand and held his hand. Then with a domineering and serious face he said, Eunuch's son, tell me, if I don't have this tooth, will it affect my handsomeness? Will it? Eunuch's son lowered his eyes and looked at the little incisors that were leaking air when he spoke. He desperately held back his laughter and coughed twice before saying, it won't affect. You have good taste. Little seventh prince heard the answer he wanted to hear and returned to his usual noble poker face. Wherever he went, no one dared to provoke him. On the other hand, Hellion Vivian was a little restless. The scene in the dream was getting clearer and clearer. She felt more and more resentment. That person really wanted to come back. But it didn't seem that she would give up her body when she came back. If it was in the past, Hellion Wei Wei would definitely return this body to him. But now she had her own reasons for not wanting to leave. She didn't know if she would meet such a person again. He looked cold and heartless but doted on her to the bone. Chapter 432. Pitter-patter. Raindrops fell on the wide leaves. Eunuchs and palace maids were walking back and forth in the imperial garden. There was only a remote area that was specially blocked by a few shadow guards. In the quiet pavilion, the retired emperor stood with his hands behind his back. He glanced at his favorite grandson and said, Ju, tell me the truth. That girl Wei Wei, has her body been taken over? After the death of the Hellion Jiaoer, the people of the 4 great families completely lost their composure. They insisted that the new princess was possessed and used all means to confuse the world. Even the royal family killed the Phoenix girl for her. They would face the fate of being destroyed in the future. Now that things had escalated to this point, he had to ask. Now that the Dragon War Empire was still in his hands, he was the one who coordinated all the forces involved. He could do anything according to Ju, he could do whatever he wanted. But if it was a possessed person, the retired emperor lowered his eyes. He really didn't know what he would do. She's not. Beligaju's tone was indifferent, his expression didn't change. She's just a little smarter than before. Such a small thing actually became a topic of gossip. The retired emperor smiled. That girl is not just a little smarter. If she's really the one who possessed the body, her main target should be the royal family, not the remnants of the Su family. Beligaju shook the teacup in his hand. The silver ring on his ring finger made his hands look even more noble. If she didn't marry me, no one would say that about her. When the retired emperor heard this, he couldn't bear it and sighed. You're the prince of the Dragon War Empire. So many eyes are watching you. It's normal for someone to take advantage of the slightest mistake and make an issue of it. Speaking of this, the retired emperor paused and said, If Wei Wei is really possessed, what are you going to do? What else can I do? Of course I can't let her go easily. When Beligaju said this, he held the teacup and took a sip of the water inside. His eyes were so deep that no one could see any thoughts. The person waiting at the side heard this and frowned. The retired emperor patted him on the shoulder. A little girl, if she is a little too powerful, it will make people suspicious, especially when she has such a stepmother. Don't worry, grandfather will suppress this matter, but at the same time you should be careful. Bailey Jiaju's voice was faint as he replied. After that, the two of them talked about something else. Third brother said that? The fifth prince, who was only a few years younger than Beligaju, laughed coldly. He is indeed a heartless person. Thanks to Hellion Vivian and Beligaju, he had been having a hard time recently. His mother was banished to the cold palace and was never allowed to leave. Her uncle was also killed for plotting a rebellion. Now the entire Murong mansion was filled with white slips of paper. He, the fifth prince, was truly a good-for-nothing. Think of his glorious days in the past and look at him now. The fifth prince clenched his fists and looked at the woman behind him. Miss Yun, please give me an idea. A woman dressed in shadow slowly walked out, but her face was covered by gauze. Her voice was soft as she lowered her eyes and asked the eunuch, "Did the third prince say that we can't let him off lightly?" "Yes, His Highness also said that the imperial palace will definitely not tolerate a person who is possessed." The servant lowered his head even more. "It sounds like he doesn't take the princess consort seriously." The fifth prince was not satisfied. "If that's the case, how am I going to deal with him?" "Calm down, Your Highness." Yun Biluo laughed softly. "The royal family doesn't take Hellion Vivian seriously, huh? I wonder how Hellion Vivian will feel when she hears this." The fifth prince was suddenly enlightened. "You're thinking of... great. What a brilliant plan. Eunuch Li, write down the conversation you overheard and send it to my heartless and lazy third sister-in-law. Let's see how they'll fight against each other." "Yes." Eunuch Li bowed and left. Before he left, he glanced at Yun Biluo again. Logically speaking, Yun Biluo was called back by the Empress to help them drive a wedge between the retired emperor and the royal family. Now that the Empress had lost her power, Yun Biluo did not kick her when she was down. Instead, she helped the little master to deal with that person. However, he still felt that he could not figure it out. What could he do even if he could not figure it out? He had to take a gamble before the retired emperor sent the little master to the frontier. Only then would he have a chance to survive. Dusk. Beligaju, who was dressed in white and black, was sitting in the south study room, reading the memorials in his hands. The ancient scrolls in his hands always gave off a different vibe. No one would believe that those hands could be so ruthless when it came to killing. Your Highness." An official who was kneeling in the south study room did not dare to stand up after such a long time. The brush in Beligaju's hand paused. When he saw the silver ring on his ring finger, his eyes softened a little. "You may leave. Don't do this again." Leave? The official could not believe what he heard. He swallowed hard. Happiness came too suddenly. He was not ready yet. What should he do? Beligaju thought for a while and said, "Forget it. You don't have to leave." The official was speechless. "No. I beg of you, Your Highness. I'd better leave." Although happiness came too suddenly, it was better than no happiness at all. "I heard that you have many concubines," Beligaju continued in a flat tone. The official straightened his neck and shouted, "That's just a rumor." Beligaju put down the brush in his hand and raised his long and narrow phoenix eyes. The official immediately became honest. He put his fingers together and said, In fact it's not too many. Just a dozen. It's over." His Highness would not directly confiscate his house because of this matter, right? If His Highness insisted on doing so, he would die in front of him. "How do you usually coax them?" "What?" The official felt that there was something wrong with his ears. Trembling, he raised his head in shock. After confirming that it was his master who was asking, he tentatively replied, How do I coax them? What can make those women happy?" Beligaju's voice was very light. His long eyebrows slightly wrinkled. The official was stunned. His Highness was seriously asking him now. "Your Highness, you don't have to do anything. Just stand there and show your face. They will faint." He had never been so honest before. Beligaju rubbed the side of his face with his fingers and smiled evilly. "She really likes this face of mine. The most handsome man in the world, who doesn't like him?" The official looked at his master and then looked at his fat body. He suddenly felt sad. He always felt that the heavens were unfair. Besides the face. Chapter 433. Apart from the face. Money. The official had never seen his master so easy to talk to, so he was instantly excited. Your Highness, think about it. This humble subject looks like this, so why are there still people throwing themselves at me one after another? Beligaju faintly glanced at him. Isn't it because those people are blind? Official, he was wrong. Even if His Highness was abnormal, his poisonous tongue was still there. Because of this humble servant's identity. When the official said this, he was a little shy. I am in charge of the national treasury, so I will always have some money on hand. Beligaju's voice was low as he hummed. After the official said this, he was a little regretful. He thought to himself, oh my God. How did I tell him all my secrets? Is this His Highness' new way of interrogating people? The official glanced at Beligaju with uncertainty. How could Beligaju not see through his thoughts? He slowly turned the ring on his ring finger and smiled coldly. Today, I don't intend to kill anyone. However, if you continue to be so hesitant, maybe I will change my mind. Your Highness, don't be angry. This humble servant will continue. The official wiped the cold sweat on his forehead and said, when it comes to money, you have to know how to spend it. If you give them money directly, they may not like it much. You have to give them a part and use a part. For example, this humble official would always bring this humble official's new wife to Drunken Village at night and book a private room. She would order whatever she wanted to eat. Then we would take a stroll around Buyun Manor and buy whatever new silk, satin or headwear she fancies. In short, I'm buying it for her. Beligaju's slender fingers tapped on the ancient book, and his whole body was noble. That's it? That's basically it. In any case, he felt that money was omnipotent when used well. Beligaju closed the ancient book and raised his eyebrows. It's simpler than I thought. What is simple? The official was confused. He listened for a long time, but he didn't know what the master wanted to do. Could it be? Suddenly, the official seemed to have thought of something. His eyes swept over his master's fair and slender hands, and he immediately understood. His Highness was most likely asking for the Princess Consort. His guess was right. Beligaju was indeed doing this to make Hellion Vivian happy. After not going to White Academy for so many days, she must have been bored by herself. He had never forgotten how much she didn't like to be tied down and free. In order to dispel her thoughts of leaving the palace, the problem had to be solved from the root. Hellion Vivian had no idea what was going on. When she saw him walk in, she stretched lazily as usual. Then she stuffed the snacks she had chosen into his mouth. Hugging the snack box, she smiled. A new discovery. How is it? Yes, it does. Smells like mint. Beligaju reached out and pulled her over. He held her in his arms and sat on the chaise lounge naturally. We'll go out for dinner. You go and change your clothes. Hellion Wei Wei smiled. Men's clothing or women's clothing? Men's clothing. Since that day, he didn't want her to appear on the street. She was too good at attracting bees and butterflies. Hellion Wei Wei responded with a yes. After a while, she walked out in a white dress. Her face was beautiful, and because she was wearing men's clothing, the mole under the corner of her eye always gave people a kind of charm that they wanted to look at again and again. Beligaju looked at her for a long time. His long eyebrows wrinkled and then he waved his sleeve. She didn't know what it was, but it was on her face. It's okay now. It's okay? Hellion Vivian looked at the face in the bronze mirror that couldn't be any darker. She couldn't help but wonder where His Highness's aesthetic standards were. Before she could ask, Beligaju had already bent his head and kissed her hard. It was a little overbearing but also a little gentle. A kiss was like a storm, as if it couldn't blow her into the boundless sea. She could only hold on to him tightly, holding him and constantly gasping for breath. I really don't want you to go out. The man's voice was low and hoarse, sexy and gentle. It was so pleasant to hear that it made people's hearts tremble. They couldn't help but want to agree to all of his requests. Hellion Vivian's face was crimson red. Her red lips were moist and her eyes were full of moisture. It was even more seductive. Then I won't go out. Forget it, it's all arranged. Beligaju held her waist and couldn't help but bite her ear. Scope. Hellion Vivian was very suspicious. If it wasn't arranged, how would His Highness torment her? Just thinking about it made Hellion Vivian feel like she had touched a taboo box. She directly buried her face in his arms. Smelling the man's pleasant scent, she comfortably closed her eyes. Beligaju carried her into the carriage like this. The two of them sat together. Their fingers were interlocked, and the light emitted by the rings gave people an indescribable feeling of intimacy. The two of them used aliases. They just came out to play for a day. He waved his sleeves and ordered all the eunuchs and guards in the palace to leave, leaving only the shadow guards who came and went without a trace. Just like that, they casually walked on the street. Both of their figures were very good-looking. Even if their appearances were disguised, their innate temperament still made many people subconsciously look back a few times. Hellion Vivian bought a roasted sweet potato. After opening it, she divided it into half for Beligaju. It was very sweet and hot in her mouth. Don't get it everywhere. The royal family was always responsible for wiping hands. Hellion Vivian wanted to tell him that eating roasted sweet potatoes had to be fast and accurate. But when she looked back at His Highness's table manners, she was conquered in a minute. After all, it was rare to see people who ate roasted sweet potatoes and made it into a beautiful movie promotional video. Her hands were dirty from eating, but only his fingertips were a little dirty. His table manners were very good. After Beligaju finished his roasted sweet potato, he wiped his hands with a handkerchief. It's getting late. Let's go to Zuexiong restaurant. There's something you like to eat there. And after eating, we'll pack a portion of spiced beef for Xiaoqi. Hellion Vivian grabbed his hand and went upstairs. It was a top-notch private room and every part of it was luxurious. Even if it was a private visit, the royal family couldn't change their preference for peace and quiet. Before the dishes were served, Zuexiong restaurant would first serve some melon seeds and peanuts. Hellion Vivian held the box of melon seeds and ate them very obediently. Beligaju sat next to her. Like before, his arm was on the back of her chair. He said slowly, "I'll eat too." Hellion Vivian gave him a handful of melon seeds. Beligaju didn't take it. His body was still leaning back. His fingers stroked her long hair unhurriedly. "I thought this kind of thing should be served by Madam." Chapter 434. Hellion Vivian looked at Beligaju's smiling almond-shaped eyes and raised an eyebrow. Then she popped a melon seed and sent it to Beligaju's mouth. His thin lips slightly opened and she didn't know if it was intentional or not, but the tip of his tongue swept across her fingertips. He chuckled and said, "The taste is not bad." Hellion Vivian wanted to avoid it, but he held her waist and said, "Eat a few more. The dishes haven't been served yet." Hellion Vivian had no choice but to continue popping melon seeds for His Highness. But the next one, before she could put down the shell, he kissed her directly, letting the melon seed between his lips flow between the two of them. He didn't pry open her lips like before. Instead, he gently nibbled on it and said in a low voice, "Just like this, so seductive." Hellion Vivian didn't need to look at herself to know what state she was in. But his fingers were still undoing her robes and his hot breath hit her, burning her legs. "Didn't I tell you before that you look even more attractive in men's clothing? Don't do it here." Hellion Wei's eyes were watery from being rubbed by him, and her voice was a little shaky. Shoo, Beligaju picked her up and kissed her behind the ear, but he didn't really want to do anything here. The two of them were intimate for a while. Only then did he let her go and feed her some water. Hellion Vivian's fingers were weak because of that intimacy, and the corners of her eyes were still red as she leaned into his arms. The dishes were all ordered and Shadow was in charge of delivering them. It wasn't much different from the palace. The main thing was that the two of them didn't like crowds, so they were more casual. They didn't need to let others see how loving they were, so everything was more relaxed. Like now, Hellion Vivian was leaning in Beligaju's arms, like a little hamster eating the food that His Highness gave her. The table was full of delicacies and the small jar of pork ribs was still warm, not to mention the braised prawns. Every dish was very appetizing. In the past, Hellion Vivian found it troublesome to eat prawns. Now watching a man peel prawns was like watching an aesthetic scene. "Delicious?" Beligaju looked at her slightly puffed cheeks and smiled. Hellion Vivian put a prawn in his mouth and chuckled, "It's delicious." The dinner lasted for almost 2 hours. In the end, Hellion Vivian felt a little sleepy and kept yawning. When she walked through the hall, she saw that some of the things that women couldn't eat were eaten by the men. Therefore she tugged at His Highness's hand and showed it to him. She meant that he should learn from it in the future. Bailey Jiaju gave her face and glanced at her. Then he looked back at her and said in an indifferent tone, I do want to eat your leftovers. The point is, madam, when have you ever left anything behind? Hellion Vivian. It seemed that, indeed, she had never left anything behind. Why did she feel that she was being mocked again? I don't eat much either. Hellion Vivian felt that she had to clear her name. Baligaju nodded and hugged her. He was very insincere. Compared to Little Seven, you really don't eat much. Hellion Vivian. Baligaju looked at the petrified Hellion Vivian and couldn't help but laugh. He kissed her forehead and said, Go to the carriage and take a look. There's something for you. For me? Hellion Vivian smiled and walked to the front of the carriage. When she lifted the curtain, she saw the gold, silver and jewels spread out on the ground. That pair of ink-black eyes lit up in an instant, beckoning Bailey Jiaju to lie on it, completely luxurious. The carriage didn't go directly into the palace. Instead it went to a royal garden. There were torches lit outside and the interior of the carriage was illuminated by night pearls. The two of them hugged each other and lifted the curtain. They felt more comfortable than ever as they enjoyed the night breeze and the sound of insects. What did you do to those two palace servants yesterday? Hellion Vivian looked up and asked as she ate sunflower seeds. Hearing this, Baligaju's face was full of hostility. He sneered, just a small matter. They didn't handle it properly and let you know? Hellion Vivian paused and didn't say anything. Baligaju looked at her expression and realized that he had lost his composure. He quickly calmed down and chuckled. Don't listen to those people's nonsense. Those two palace servants were unclean and I sent them out of the palace last night. If you have time to think nonsense, why don't you think about how to repay me for today's arrangement? As he spoke, he hugged her and kissed her neck. Hellion Vivian didn't really care about those things. However, she didn't know how long he would torment her in this kind of place. But although she said so, her body couldn't resist. Moreover, a new full moon was coming. Every touch was like an invisible hook to her. Baligaju had already begun to undress her. Her entire body was numb and she couldn't break free. She could vaguely hear him say in her ear, Say you want me to go in? Hellion Vivian's voice changed from being tortured by him. It was a bit hoarse, but she could only say a single word. Baligaju couldn't help it. Looking at her long hair scattered on the expensive red fur in the carriage, everything seemed so tempting. He exerted strength in his palm and gently moved. Worried that someone would know what was going on in the carriage, Hellion Vivian bit her lips tightly. However, she was tormented by him again and again until she just wanted to scream out loud. Her slender fingers couldn't help but grab the fur under her body. She begged in a hoarse voice, Slow down, but he smiled and lowered his head to kiss her ear. His breathing was very heavy. Slow down. How can I let you give birth to a prince for me, His gentle words made Hellion Vivian's ears turn red. When we were at the dinner table just now, I was thinking about having you like this. Baligaju's voice fell. The moonlight shone in densely, but it couldn't hide the charm in the carriage. She didn't know how long had passed. The numbness still hadn't faded. Hellion Vivian was originally muddle-headed, but because of the invasion again and again, she was a little happy and absent-minded. It was different from usual, but the slow torment was intoxicating. Time after time, it directly hit the top of her heart mixed with his heartbeat. At that time, Hellion Vivian only felt an indescribable happiness. He coaxed her to say a lot of things that she couldn't say normally. He even lowered his voice and guided her, Say that you will never leave me. Say it. Hellion Vivian didn't know what he was saying. Baligaju didn't give it to her. Hellion Vivian couldn't stand it. Her breath was unstable and she said all the words. Then, she was extremely excited. After a night of entanglement, her body was as hot as fire. It wasn't until noon the next day that Hellion Vivian woke up in the bedroom. Just as she was washing up, she received an unknown letter. Chapter 435. The letter was seen by the eunuch who usually took care of the internal affairs. There were only 4 words written on the envelope. Hellion Vivian. The eunuch didn't know what to do with this letter. Also, he wasn't literate, so he gave it to Eunuch Sunday. Eunuch Sun was probably the only one in the palace who was literate. Originally, he wanted to directly give it to Baligaju, but before he could move, Hellion Vivian took the letter from his hand. Wang Princess Consort? Eunuch's son stuttered, then indicated for the young eunuch to leave first. Helian Wei Wei's slender fingertips slid across the envelope as her lips curved into a smile. After that, she glanced at him and opened the letter in front of Eunuch Sunday. After that, she read the letter line by line. There wasn't much in the letter, it was just the contents of the conversation between the Emperor Emeritus and Baligaju. From when the retired emperor asked Bailey Jiaju what he would do if she was really the one who had taken over his body, to when Bailey Jiaju said that if it was true he would definitely not let her go easily and treat her lightly, and so on and so forth. Everything big and small was written down one by one. Helian Wei Wei's letter was opened in front of Eunuch's son, so he couldn't help but take a few glances at the letter. When he reached the end, he immediately became anxious and scolded, which son of a bitch couldn't bear to see others doing well and came to sow discord. Someone come quickly burn this letter for me. Eunuch's son said this while looking at Helian Vivian's expression. His heart was shocked again. He didn't know what the princess consort meant. That day when His Highness said this, he was also there. He only heard a few sentences and forgot what His Highness said that day. But who would have thought that someone would write down this kind of thing for the princess consort to see? It really was a vicious mind. He had watched the two of them get to where they were today. His Highness finally found someone he liked and pampered her everywhere. He really didn't dare to imagine. If His Highness lost the princess consort, would the entire imperial palace be buried with her? He and the Emperor Emeritus didn't want to see His Highness fall into the devil's path because of his cold nature. They were afraid that something would go wrong, so they quickly advised, Princess Consort, you must not believe the nonsense of these people. The person who wrote this kind of letter clearly has other thoughts. Princess Consort should give this letter to this old servant. Such a dirty thing should not be seen by the Princess Consort. On His Highness' side, even if he said it, he definitely didn't mean it. His Highness is... I know. Helian Wei Wei laughed softly, as if she was very much looking at Eunuch's son's anxious appearance. She teased him, Eunuch's son is truly more anxious than your own matters. Eunuch's son was stunned and then let out a long sigh of relief. Princess, you didn't say anything just now. You really scared this old servant to death. This old servant thought that you had a grudge against His Highness. How could that be? Helian Vivian carefully looked at the letter. He picked it up with her fingers and sniffed it. Her voice was cold. Using this kind of method to send this letter, they definitely don't have good intentions. If this kind of thing really happened, I will directly ask Baligaju. Also, Eunuch's son said that possession is nonsense. Eunuch's son didn't react for a moment. Did he say this? He probably said it, right? No matter what, as long as the princess consort didn't misunderstand His Highness, it was fine. But this letter can't be burned. Helian Vivian supported her chin with one hand and picked up the letter with the other. She lazily smiled. Eunuch's son was stunned. Why? Could it be that the princess consort said it was fine but she still cared? Carefully feel the thickness of this paper. Helian Vivian's voice was calm. It's very comfortable to touch. It's not rough at all. It also has a sandalwood fragrance. People can't afford to use this kind of paper. Also, in the imperial palace, other than the emperor and retired emperor, only the princes can use it. This paper must be kept. When His Highness returns, it will be given to His Highness. If it really is another prince, then we have to guard against it. After all, the conversation between retired emperor and His Highness is not easily known to others. It can be seen that this person has planted some people in the imperial palace. Eunuch's son listened to Helian Vivian's analysis. He was so shocked he couldn't speak. When he first saw this letter, he was only concerned with being angry. How could he notice the quality of the paper? Now that he felt it, it was familiar. The imperial palace was very particular about the use of rice paper. The imperial household had records of what kind of paper each person used. The retired emperor, the emperor, and the princes all used the best paper. Princesses and concubines were second. He had been with His Highness for a long time. He more or less had the ability to distinguish. He knew that this kind of letter usually came with bad intentions. But he had never seen someone as calm and composed as the princess consort. Eunuch's son restrained himself and asked, Princess Consort, after reading these words, won't your imagination run wild? If I can't see through these provocations, then I don't need to mingle. Helian Wei Wei hugged her own snack box, raised her head and laughed. Her hair was fluffy. As for letting my imagination run wild, I really haven't. Someone else said that His Highness only treats me as prey and raises me, I would be more convinced. Moreover, at that time His Highness had to give retired emperor such an answer. Otherwise he wouldn't be protecting me but harming me. In this case, the more Beligaju pretended not to care, the safer she would be. The safer she would be. He was protecting her, but she still doubted him. Whether it was good words or not, it was not to be heard with the ears, but to try to feel with the heart. Think of things simply and see the result. Then you would know who was really good to you. He could be unscrupulous, but for her he held back his anger. She didn't care about the process. He was the same as him. She couldn't say flowery words. Sometimes she would even use unscrupulous thoughts that others would think. But this was just the way they loved each other. No matter what the other party was thinking, as long as the final result was for the two of them to be together forever, it was good. Hellion Vivian even didn't know whether to laugh or cry when she saw the letter. Perhaps too many people couldn't distinguish right from wrong in the face of rumors and slanders. But these people, did they really think she was stupid? She could analyze, look at the result, and know what the trend of this matter was. Any blind emotion wouldn't last long. She had already brought up all the grudges she had with him in the beginning. Others wanted to use a few words to destroy her feelings for Beligaju. She didn't want to believe that he was good to her, but she wanted to believe a few words of falsehood. Why did she feel that her intelligence was being challenged like never before? She really wanted to directly give the other party a haha. They didn't even understand her nature, but they actually sent this kind of letter. As a domineering president. Chapter 436. Of course, one had to love and dote on their other half rationally. This was the common sense in arms tycoon. Don't you even know common sense? People who don't read novels are scary, they are uncultured. At the same time, the fifth prince and Yun Biluo, who were in another part of the palace, were eager to see the infighting between Hellion Wei Wei and Bailey Jiaju. They would never understand where their plan went wrong. Hellion Vivian told them that it was because they had never read novels. The result would be, cough cough cough. The letter did not stay in Hellion Vivian's hands for long. In less than a quarter of an hour, it was handed to Beligaju. Eunuch Sun could clearly feel the air around him turning cold. His master just smiled, his pure black eyes were cold. This letter is well written. The person who wrote it is interesting too, not missing a single word. Must have been hard on them. Eunuch Sun did not dare to speak, he swallowed his saliva hard. Beligaju picked up the teacup in his hand, his fingers paused. Crack. He threw it out. The water droplets splashed on the table, soaking the rice paper on it. Go and investigate. Beligaju narrowed his eyes, revealing an oppressive aura that made people hold their breaths. After you find out, bring them to Imperial Grandfather. They have worked so hard, I should treat them well. Eunuch Sun knew that the treatment his master was talking about would be worse than hell. However, he rarely saw His Highness so angry. Even if he killed someone, he would do it lightly and not stained with blood. After he was done, he would wash his hands and change his clothes, maintaining his usual immaculate appearance. It was rare to see him deal with someone directly like today. It seemed that those people had crossed His Highness's bottom line this time. After all, the Princess Consort should not have seen that letter. Thinking of this, Eunuch Sun hesitated and said, then the Princess Consort. Upon hearing this, Beligaju's fingers paused, his eyes darkened. Go and call Nangong Lai here. Young Master Lai? Eunuch Sun did not understand why he was calling him Young Master Lai at this time. Beligaju frowned and his tone was much lighter. He's better at dealing with this kind of thing. Eunuch Sun instantly understood. When it came to coaxing women, young Master Lai did have his own way of coaxing them. In less than half an instance's time, Nangong Lai, whose robe was slightly open, strolled over and directly sat on the chaise lounge. He stretched out his hand and loosened his collar. Aju, fortunately you called me over. I don't know what's wrong with that group of old things recently. It's like they've gone crazy. They insist that Wei Wei is possessed and ask me to perform divination for them every day. By the way, why are you looking for me? Beligaju didn't say much and directly threw the letter to him. After Nangong Lai finished reading, he smiled evilly. Someone actually dared to eavesdrop on your conversation with the retired emperor. Are they tired of living? I just got this letter from Wei Wei. Beligaju's voice was indifferent. His fingers tapped on the wooden table as if he was thinking. Nangong Lai's expression was one of confusion. This kind of letter obviously can't be in her hands. It will definitely cause a misunderstanding and affect the relationship between you two. She didn't misunderstand. Baligaju suddenly seemed to have figured something out. The corner of his mouth curled up. That kind of smile made Nangong Lai a little dizzy. Then why are you telling me this? Nangong Lai didn't understand. Baligaju reached out and took his outer shirt. He slowly buttoned it up. Nothing. I just want to show off my relationship with her. Nangong Lai was speechless. Wait, Aju, come back and explain clearly. What's the point of torturing me like this? Bailey Jiaju did not pay any attention to the voice behind him as he paced back to the palace. Hellion Vivian was talking to a mercenary in black. When she saw him coming, she said to the mercenary, "That's it. You go and do it." Yes. The mercenary looked down and left. When he brushed past Baligaju, he couldn't help but feel a little nervous. He also understood that if it wasn't for this man's permission, he wouldn't even be able to enter. Although on the surface, the third prince restricted the young lord's freedom. In fact, no matter what the young lord did, this man didn't stop him. I asked the imperial kitchen to make rose cake for you. Have you eaten it? After the mercenary left, Baligaju directly reached out, picked her up and put her on his lap. His voice was low and pleasant. Hellion Vivian yawned and played with his hand. She compared their hands. I ate a piece. It wasn't as good as the apricot cake. Little Seven liked it, so I gave it to him. He's losing his teeth now. How can he taste it? Bailey Jiaju chuckled and interlocked his fingers with hers. He slowed down and said, regarding today's letter, I did say some of the words on it, but not the rest. However, when I said these words, I didn't want people to keep an eye on you. Since ancient times, people's hearts are unpredictable in this palace. I'll get rid of the people from the 4 great families sooner or later. When the time is right, I'll make them all shut up. In this world, only the dead were the safest. Hellion Vivian saw the violence in his eyes. After thinking, she leaned over and kissed his eyelids. I know, but there's one thing that makes me very angry. What? Baligaju's heart suddenly stopped. Hellion Vivian raised her eyebrows and yawned lazily. What do you think the person who sent this letter is thinking? Is he insulting my intelligence? I know how good you are to me. Even if you raise a dog, it can't bite its owner, let alone a person. Don't you see the collar on my neck? I'm the overbearing president of the Loyal Dog. A group of little brainless people. Baligaju touched her hair and put his thin lips behind her ear. His voice was low and tempting. Say those 2 words again. Hellion Weiwei was puzzled and paused. What 2 words? What can't I bite? Bailey Jiaju casually said as he reached his hand into her clothes. His handsome face was indifferent, as if he wasn't the one who was doing these things. It was probably because of his temperament that people felt the contrast was more exciting. Hellion Vivian was hot all over. She refused to say those 2 words again. But how could Bailey Jiaju let her go? After a few rounds of caressing, he kissed her from the shoulder down inch by inch through her clothes. He held her waist from behind with one hand and undid those annoying buttons with the other hand. He mischievously bit her ear lightly. Be good, tell me, what can't I bite? Chapter 437. Hellion Vivian couldn't help but call out in a trembling voice, Master. These 2 words seemed to have hit a switch, causing Baligaju's eyes to darken. He directly picked up Hellion Vivian and rubbed against her heavily, tormenting her. However, it felt like he was taking care of her. It felt like he was trying to please her. The pleasure he brought even made her toes feel a little numb. After that, the 2 of them lay on the small bed. He followed her hair and kissed the corner of her eyes, but his eyes were smiling. This little thing was smarter than other people. Especially those words just now. How could someone be so likable when they spoke? Loyal dog? Who would call themselves a dog? Idiot. As Baligaju thought about it, he pinched Hellion Vivian's paw. Do you like cats or dogs? Hellion Vivian smiled and opened her eyes lazily. I like both, but I prefer large dogs. Why? Baligaju looked at her and then smiled elegantly. His charming thin lips opened slightly, and there was an indescribable charm. His voice was so low that it was pleasant to the ear. Woof. Hellion Vivian was really stunned. She stared blankly at the man in front of her. What did she just hear? Even though Hellion Weiwei's temperament was usually calm and rational, seeing this kind of scene, she also somewhat felt that she was dreaming. However, the corners of Beligaju's mouth curled up into a smile. Woof. Ah. How could this man be so cute? It was simply against the rules. That face was already seductive enough. He even barked at her. That was why a certain highness was a torturous little demon. No one was more torturous than him. Hellion Vivian directly hugged his waist and was very happy. Bark again and I'll eat ribs today. To be able to raise a royal as a pet, it was definitely awesome to take it out. This was the true portrayal of marrying a tall, rich and handsome man and walking to the pinnacle of life. Compared to pork ribs, I prefer to eat. Beligaju lowered his eyes and leaned his thin lips against Hellion Vivian's earlobe. Hellion Vivian trembled. She almost suspected that he deliberately didn't say the word yuk so that she would think of Pian Pian. However, the way His Highness lowered his voice and barked was too tempting. There was no way to refuse. As if he had seen through her thoughts, Bailey Jiaju let out a deep woof in her ear again. His drawn-out tone had a magnetism that made people fall deeply into it. Eunuch's son stood outside, not daring to look around. It was only because he had something to report that he hesitantly reported from behind the precious screen. Your Highness, the letter has been handed over to the Imperial Clan Court according to your Highness's wishes. The retired Emperor also knows about this matter. Hellion Vivian was about to get up when she heard them talking about business. You sleep for a while. I'll deal with it. Beligaju took an outer robe and covered her properly. Then he walked out with the robe half open. Eunuch's son almost didn't dare to raise his head because he didn't have time to hide his seductive aura. As a servant he couldn't say anything. In the past he thought that His Highness wouldn't be very interested in that kind of thing. Who knew that after the princess consort entered the palace? His Highness was more and more liked from now on. The Emperor won't attend morning court. According to this progress, the princess consort would definitely be pregnant with the little master in no time. When Eunuch's son thought of this he felt happy. Recently, the retired emperor often talked to him about this. In the future, what clothes to wear for the little master and what treasures to give him. He couldn't be like the little seventh prince who wore tiger-headed and tiger-skinned clothes from a young age. They must raise the little master delicately. As soon as Bailey Jiaju saw Eunuch's son's motivational expression, he knew that this old man was thinking of something else. His voice faintly opened his mouth. After retired emperor found out, what did he say? Eunuch's son replied, he already sent people to investigate this matter. Beligaju slowly turned the ring on his ring finger and said in a cold voice, let the emperor also understand. The elders of the 4 great families also told them not to mention the possession of the body. Put the focus on the matter of the 5th prince having other thoughts. When I kill someone I have to let them watch me kill. Eunuch's son, do you understand? Eunuch's son was shocked by the cold tone of his voice. He knew that his master lowered his voice to talk about this matter because he didn't want the princess consort to know. He also understood what His Highness meant. Usually this kind of thing would never involve the emperor. After all, that person, to say something disrespectful, he was always playing with those elixirs of immortality. How would he have time to care about the matters of the imperial court? But it was this kind of emperor who was most afraid of the princes having thoughts about his throne. His Highness was the heir apparent appointed by the retired emperor. Because of this identity, the emperor was always on guard against His Highness when he was young. If it wasn't for His Highness's martial chi that was unparalleled in the world and could control the people of the 4 great families, how could he live peacefully until now? If the emperor knew about this matter, it wouldn't be so simple. It had to be said that His Highness's methods were always so ruthless. This kind of thing, don't let the princess consort know about it in the future. Beligaju said lightly. Eunuch's son understood that today's letter shouldn't have been seen by the princess consort. His Highness sent him to the princess consort to avoid this kind of situation. Fortunately, the princess consort was open-minded. If it was another woman, there might be some misunderstanding. When Eunuch's son thought about it now, he still felt a lingering fear. His forehead overflowed with sweat and he replied in a low voice, yes, Your Highness, don't worry. This kind of thing will never happen again. It's not your fault. Those people are too considerate. Beligaju curved his thin lips, but there was no smile in his eyes. He just stood in the shadow of the wooden window with his robe open, giving people a feeling that he was encountering a demon and was full of hostility. He lowered his head and took a sip of the teacup in his hand and said in a cold voice, they're courting death. the imperial palace began to fall into an indescribable silence. It was because it was too quiet. It was inevitable that the fifth prince would have doubts. Even Yunbiluo didn't understand. Could it be that the letter wasn't delivered? If Hellion Vivian didn't receive the letter herself, then all of this would be meaningless. Miss Yun, what do you think we should do now? After all, the fifth prince was still young and didn't understand the situation. Yunbiluo was smart enough to ask him to bear with it and said, but we can ask around if Hellion Vivian received the letter. This was easy. The palace servants all had their own way of doing things. They didn't need to ask directly to get the clues they wanted. Soon the eunuch who served the fifth prince all year round came back. He knelt on the ground and said, Your Highness, I found out that the letter was received by the third princess Consort herself. The grudge in her heart should have been planted. Chapter 438. Good. The fifth prince could not help but exclaim. There was still a hint of immaturity on his handsome face. Yunbiluo laughed as well and said softly, There's no such thing as an impenetrable secret in this world. It's true that women are unpredictable. Your Highness, you don't have to get involved in this matter anymore. Just wait for Hellion Vivian to make a fuss. You're right, Miss Yun. The fifth prince sneered, If it weren't for her, my mother wouldn't have been banished to the cold palace. She's an orphan who lost the support of her family. How could she expect to ride roughshod over the palace after doing something bad? Ah, what a joke. No matter how much my royal grandfather dotes on her and Beligaju, my royal father is still on my side. That was what the fifth prince was grasping. The existence of Beligaju had always been a thorn in the emperor's heart. His son was more prestigious than the emperor. To be honest, if it were not for Beligaju's shrewdness and ruthlessness, perhaps the emperor would have dealt with him long ago. However, the four great families were in the way. The internal conflict within the imperial family had been put on hold. However, anyone with a discerning eye knew that the emperor favored the fifth prince more. Otherwise, the emperor did not really do anything to the fifth prince when such a big incident happened last time. It was obvious that if the fifth prince did not have that thought, even if Empress Murong had that thought, he would not have done anything to his beloved son. The fifth prince knew this very well, which was why he dared to put someone beside the retired emperor without any scruples. He thought that even if something were to happen in the future, he and his royal father were on the same side. His royal father would protect him. Little did he know that the emperor in the alchemy room already had the idea of disposing of him. The emperor slammed the letter in his hand on the wooden table. His eyes were filled with anger as he listened to the people below talking about how the fifth prince was doing now. He even knew the retired emperor's movements clearly, let alone the emperor's. It was obvious that he had thoughts that he should not have and reached out his hand that he should not have. When the emperor heard the last sentence, the teacup and snacks in his hand were crushed. Beligaju, who was sitting next to him, had a nonchalant expression on his face. He gently turned the teacup in his hand as if he didn't care about this matter at all. The emperor knew that he should give an explanation to Beligaju. In the past, when he encountered this kind of thing, he would always put on an act, but in private he would protect the fifth prince. Now, the emperor didn't want to give anyone an explanation, but he felt that he had raised an ingrate. Just like what the people below said, he dared to cut off the retired emperor's words without missing a word, let alone her. If this wasn't the same as prying into his throne, then what was it? Call the fifth prince over. As the emperor threw the teacup in his hand, all the palace servants shuddered. In his heart he thought that this time, there would be a large-scale change in the imperial palace. Fortunately, they were in the right position. Indeed, accompanying the emperor was like accompanying a tiger. At the beginning of this year's spring, who would have thought that the doted Murong clan would collapse? Now, not only was the empress banished to the cold palace, this fifth prince would also be implicated. If the third prince wasn't involved, how could this situation happen? Therefore, those people who understood the situation, whether it was the eunuchs in the imperial palace or those ministers who didn't know which side to stand on, they all had an idea in their hearts. The third prince was the future master of the Dragon War Empire. Even if he didn't have the retired emperor's favor, he would still be. However, the fifth prince, who didn't understand all of this, was still in his own palace, planning how to meet Hellion Vivian by chance. Using this letter, he would make things difficult for both her and Beligaju. The fifth prince was just thinking about it and was planning to set out when he suddenly received the news that the emperor wanted to see him. In his heart he didn't think much of it and even had some good intentions. He was very enthusiastic to the eunuch who came to deliver the news. "It's just a summon, I have to trouble Eunuch Lee to personally make the trip. Men reward him." This reward is not necessary. Eunuch Lee struggled to maintain the smile on his face. Fifth prince should quickly pack up and follow this old servant to the emperor. The fifth prince, who was wholeheartedly thinking about his own good plans, didn't notice the expression on Eunuch Lee's face today. He laughed heartily. "All right, then this highness will go with Eunuch Lee first. This reward will be given later." His empress mother had taught him since he was young that he must spend a lot of money to support those who could be used. It was because he spent so much money that he could still do things in the retired emperor's place. This Eunuch Lee also received a lot of benefits from him and more or less told him about the emperor's matters. The fifth prince felt that this time the emperor summoned him was just like before to give him some instructions. However, when he really entered the palace of heavenly purity, he realized that something was wrong. As soon as he raised his head, he met Baligaju's eyes. They were so cold and indifferent, without a trace of warmth. It made the fifth prince feel a chill from the bottom of his heart. Before he could react to why the third brother he hated and feared the most was here, the third brother. The emperor had already waved his hand to dismiss Eunuch Lee. The fifth prince knelt on the ground and paid his respects. He didn't hear the emperor ask him to get up. The entire palace fell into an uneasy silence. The emperor took a sip of tea, but there was an indescribable gloominess in his eyes. When he looked at the fifth prince, he smiled coldly. "Why do you keep looking back at Eunuch Lee?" The fifth prince knew that this was not an easy question to answer. The people in power were always suspicious, especially his father, the emperor. "This son just doesn't know what happened." "You don't know what happened?" The emperor sneered and threw the letter in his long sleeve at the fifth prince's face. "If you don't know what happened, then where did these things come from? This is the Xian paper specially used by you." When the fifth prince saw the letter, his face suddenly turned pale. He hurriedly explained to himself, "Imperial father, I do have this Xian paper, but other than me, the other princes also have it. Imperial father, you can make a decision for me. Stand up for you." The emperor sneered, "You still have the face to ask me to stand up for you. This letter was just sent to your third brother, and then your personal eunuch went around each courtyard. Do you think I'm stupid? Do you think that I can't be sure that it's you if I don't ask around? Also, how dare you say the words other princes? Your fourth brother has gone beyond the Great Wall and hasn't returned yet. Other than you, there's only little Seven among the princes. Little Seven is only a little older, 4 years old. He's just a 4-year-old child. How do you expect him to intercept the conversation between the retired emperor and your third brother?" Chapter 439. When the fourth prince heard this, he was so flustered that he didn't know what to do. In the past, with his mother's help, he had always been able to handle things with ease. But today he actually began to doubt himself. He had never thought that the emperor would actually find out that he had only written a letter in someone else's handwriting. The weirdest one was Hellion Vivian. Shouldn't a normal person hide this letter and try not to confront it face to face? She actually showed it to third brother. What kind of logic was this? Wasn't she afraid of what third brother said in the letter? How stupid was that Hellion Vivian? She actually wanted to hand over her past to someone else. The fifth prince tried his best to calm himself down. He was still kneeling on the ground and his voice was slightly trembling. "Imperial father, I didn't mean to criticize seventh brother. I just don't know what happened. I'm not the only one who has the paper used by this prince. Others also have it. Even the eunuchs and palace servants have picked up waste paper. This son is slow-witted and can't find any evidence to prove my innocence. All these years I have been doted on by Imperial father. This son isn't afraid of anything. I'm only afraid that Imperial father will be disappointed in this son and hurt the relationship between Imperial father and me." Imperial father was wary of third brother. He clearly understood that saying these words could at least win him a chance to live. Sure enough, the emperor's anger slightly subsided after hearing the fifth prince's words. Just like what Little Five said, it might be a misunderstanding. If someone jealous of him used this matter to drive a wedge between them, then wouldn't he have been fooled? The emperor had just thought of this. Before he could open his mouth, he heard a noise coming from outside. When he raised his head again, he saw the dignified little seven carrying a palace servant and throwing him to the ground. "Tell Imperial Father everything you know." That palace servant was none other than the fifth prince's personal eunuch who served him all year round. He was beaten to a pulp. The heart-wrenching pain made his entire body curl up. However, this was not the reason why he was about to reveal everything about the fifth prince. Even now, he still couldn't forget that Hellion Vivian, who made everyone feel that she definitely couldn't do well in the palace. If it weren't for His Highness' protection, who knew how many times she would have appeared? She looked at him like a demon. Her voice was neither high nor low, but it was enough to make him freeze in place. She said, "Eunuch Zhang's family definitely doesn't know what kind of person Eunuch Zhang is in the palace. If they knew, how sad would they be?" This was a threat. Eunuch Zhang clenched his fists, but he couldn't stop the fear that welled up in his heart. At that time, his first reaction was that this was going to be bad. Not only him but also the fifth prince had underestimated Hellion Vivian. She was not an ordinary girl at all, and she was definitely not someone who only knew how to eat and sleep. Her methods were better than the third prince's, but not inferior at all. Both husband and wife were extremely ruthless. They would not give anyone the slightest chance to breathe. At this point he had no choice but to say everything. The emperor's anger was about to subside, but after hearing Eunuch Zhang say that the empress had already instructed the fifth prince to reward the people in the palace, which was why the retired emperor had a connection. He wanted to use this opportunity to make the royal family and the third princess consort suspect, etc. The emperor was completely enraged. He couldn't care less. He took the teacup in his hand and threw it at the fifth prince. "Bastard. You still say that you don't know anything. You even said that someone is deliberately trying to sow discord between me and your father. You've already reached out where you shouldn't have. I'm not dead yet. You're so flamboyant. Good, very good." In the past, he always felt that his beloved son was still young and didn't understand these things, so he was especially close to him. He didn't expect that he actually had people in the palace. He was so young, but he was so ambitious. He even knew how to bribe the people in the palace. What was he trying to do? The thing that the emperor couldn't tolerate the most was for the princes to wantonly seize power. This time, the fifth prince's action had completely violated his taboo. The emperor didn't interrogate the fifth prince anymore. He was so angry that he kept pressing his temples with his hand. "Take him away first and let him suffer 50 strokes of the plank. After you're done, have him scram to the cold palace and accompany his mother who taught him meticulously." "Father, father." The fifth prince was still begging for mercy at first, but after all, his delicate body was precious. After a few strokes of the copper and gold plank, he changed his tune. Not to mention 50 of them, this was simply asking for his life. Baligaju saw this scene and gently played with the porcelain cup in his hand. The corner of his mouth curved up into an evil smile. At that moment, the fifth prince realized that the person he provoked could not only win against him, but could also secretly kill with a borrowed knife. Everything was over. The remaining forces of the Murong family had been completely dug out and replaced with those of Bailey Jiaju's faction without revealing anything. Only then did the people realize that they didn't know what was going on. The small forces that were scattered in the imperial court for many years had disappeared without the people noticing. Looking at the Dragon War Empire today, except for the power of the 4 big families, the rest had been returned to the royal family. The world was going to change. Hellion Wei Wei listened to the news that was sent back and laughed softly. "It's good too. Now that we've beaten one up, those people who always wanted to laugh at me and His Highness can also live peacefully for a while." Qing Zhan trembled in her heart and whispered, "It's not that simple. The fifth prince is still young, he's still a child. After a few strokes of the plank, the pain on his body is small, but he hasn't completely weaned yet. He feels that he has lost the love of the emperor and has been crying all day long. If he is banished to the cold palace, it would be worse than death." Hellion Vivian raised her eyebrows. "Qing Zhan, let's talk." Qing Zhan was a little stunned. Hellion Vivian tapped on her head with her finger. "From the moment I met you, I knew that you are soft-hearted, but a good heart should be reserved for someone who is worth it. In this world, if you set someone up, you have to think that you will get retribution one day. We should sympathize with the weak, but if the weak have an arrogant look of 'I am the weak, I am the reasonable one,' and when they hurt others they cry about how innocent they are, but when they are punished they feel wronged. Under normal circumstances, I would tell it to get lost from me at all hours of the day and night. Everyone makes mistakes, especially when a person is still young. But if they feel wronged after making a mistake, then I can only laugh. Some people take advantage of their young age to steal other people's husbands, and after they are done, they cry and say that it was the original wife who made trouble for them. If you are soft-hearted to this kind of bitch who pretends to be weak, you are harming your friends. Chapter 440. Qingzhan listened to Hellion Vivian and opened her mouth. Hellion Vivian glanced at her and continued, "You are now by my side. I don't want my people to have any misunderstandings about His Highness. He is not cold-blooded and heartless, nor does he bully the weak. He just wants to get rid of the other party when he is attacked. In the Dragon War Empire, there are people thinking about how to kill him no matter in or out of the palace. He is just a little tough, but in your eyes he is a little evil. You think that the fifth prince is still a child, so he will feel bad if he is treated like this. Then let me ask you, His Highness was also a child. So many people isolated and slandered him, did he not feel bad? He did not even offend anyone at that time. But the fifth prince, who is still a child, has the intention to kill. Now you are telling me that he is too young. So he can stab people at will at a young age, and the people who are stabbed have to thank him? Qingzhan's face and ears turned red after hearing Hellion Weiwei's words. She felt that her previous thoughts about how pitiful the fifth prince was were indeed ridiculous. If the princess consort did not mention it, she would not have understood. Now that the princess consort pointed it out, she only felt that she was simply too stupid. Her cheeks were burning. Please forgive me, princess consort. I will not think like that again in the future. Hellion Vivian did not say anything. She only felt a pain in her heart. When she was in the modern world, she also encountered such things. From the moment she decided to take revenge, the road was lonely. People sympathized with the weak who would cry out grievances. For Hellion Vivian, people often blamed and ostracized her. But they did not think that if the weak did not do such disgusting things, Hellion Vivian would not have the time to care about her. Just like now, what did Baligaju do wrong? Was it wrong to protect himself? Obviously not. However, even the people who served her felt that he was a little vicious and merciless. Hellion Vivian felt that some things should stop here. Because now she only wanted to wait for him to come back and hug him. Thud. The rain fell. The sky turned gloomy. In the palace of heavenly purity, the emperor listened to the fifth prince's screams outside. He held his teacup and looked at Baligaju for a while before saying, "You gave me this letter so that I can punish your fifth brother. Now that he has been punished, you should be happy." No. Baligaju faintly blocked the emperor's words. As a prince, you shouldn't have stretched your hand too far. Isn't it natural for him to be punished? According to him, such a person should be killed. It was just a few beatings. What was there to be happy about? That's just how you are. The emperor sneered, not to mention the viciousness of your actions. You even disregard the 6 emotions and use such a method to deal with your brother. You're not afraid. Well, you've never been afraid of anything. You've already stained your hands with blood at such a young age, let alone this time. Bailey Jiaju raised his hand and took a sip of tea. His voice was slow as he said, "Father, you can't just let fifth brother off the hook. If you let him continue, he can drag me down from the position of crown prince sooner. After all, judging from his performance this time, he is definitely more interested in your position than me." After hearing these words, the emperor was angry and annoyed. He coughed violently and quickly picked up the medicinal pills beside him and swallowed a few of them. He could not do anything to Bailey Jiaju. He could only watch him casually walk out of the palace. It was so irritating. If it were not for the palace servant beside him who was caressing him, he might have swept all the tea sets on the table to the ground. The emperor's reaction was also within Baligaju's expectations. Although they were both sons, there was still a difference between them. That person had always doted on his fifth brother. Now that he had exposed his true colors, the emperor was disappointed and probably hated him even more. After so many years, he had already gotten used to it. Compared to Baligaju's indifference, Hellion Vivian, who rarely got angry, directly flipped the things on the table when she heard the conversation from the Palace of Heavenly Purity. This made Yuan Ming and Xiao Bai, who were in the fantasy space, a little stunned. They had been by this woman's side for a long time. In the past, no matter how big of a problem she encountered, She had never lost her temper like this. Perhaps no one could understand the pain in Hellion Vivian's heart. How could a father talk about his son like this? He was not the one in the wrong. Why should he be blamed? Hellion Vivian clenched her hands and placed them on her lap. Her eyes were colder than ever, so cold that the palace servants did not dare to approach her. This was the scene that Bailey Jiaju saw when he returned. Eunuch Sun reported in a low voice, "The princess consort already knows about the fifth prince's punishment." Baligaju's fingers suddenly stiffened. He did not want her to see some of his methods, but it was unavoidable. Baligaju had just opened his mouth. But before he could finish speaking, he was pulled into someone's arms. Although Baligaju did not understand why she would do such a thing, he naturally had to accept her throwing herself into his arms. "What's wrong?" He picked her up and sat her down on the soft couch. Hellion Vivian looked at him and only said a few words. "In the future, if you want to deal with someone, just call me. If anyone dares to bully you, they have to ask if the gun in my hand agrees." As a domineering president, would he allow his other half to suffer such grievances? Definitely not. Baligaju was stunned. He did not expect to hear such words. The corners of his mouth curled up and his eyes were full of warmth. "Are you talking about the emperor?" He said those words because he is afraid of me. He hates me in his heart. He can't wait to get rid of me one day. He is afraid that I am too powerful and will affect his position. This time, if it weren't for Old Fifth's reach, he wouldn't have been willing to go against his beloved son for me. Otherwise, I'd say this palace is interesting. You guard against this and that, but you've raised an ingrate. Hellion Vivian listened quietly. She had just vented her anger. Her hair was still standing up, so she looked a little confused. Baligaju lowered his head and kissed her long hair. He smiled coldly. "Don't worry. These things are exposed in front of the emperor. He will not be able to sleep well for a month. If the fifth prince does not get rid of him, he will feel like choking. Compared to punishment, this will make him feel more uncomfortable." Hellion Wei smiled and glanced at him from the side. After a while she said, "This method of yours is really ruthless." Hearing this, Baligaju's actions stopped in midair as if he was burned by fire. However, Hellion Vivian did not see it. Chapter 441. But unexpectedly, Hellion Vivian's next sentence was, "But I like it. If you have time, you can teach me. I always feel that my thoughts are not enough in front of you." Bailey Jiaju looked up and saw a very serious little face. His pale fingers relaxed and he couldn't help but laugh involuntarily, bringing out a mischievous smile. "You also said that your mind isn't enough. How did you learn? It's good to be a little stupid. This way, when you give birth to a son, it will be balanced." Hellion Wei was speechless. In short, what a certain someone meant was that she had lowered the average IQ of the entire family. "If you say it's balanced, then it's balanced. I won't argue with you." Hellion Wei leaned back lazily. As if she had thought of something, she smiled and said, "I've been liking cats lately." How could Baligaju not understand her meaning? His thin lips moved slightly, and a low voice slowly overflowed as if deliberately dragging out the tone. "Meow." That sound was so good that it made her ears pregnant. Hellion Vivian looked at Baligaju's face. That smile that was not a smile easily made people think of the devil deacons in comics. She even had some doubts. Did His Highness have the devil genes in his body? Otherwise, how could it be possible for it to look incomparably holy and yet constantly emit that rich and elegant aura that belonged exclusively to the darkness? He shouldn't be a devil. Sensing Hellion Vivian's thoughts, Little White in the fantasy space said, "If he is a devil, it's impossible for me not to feel it." That's right, the detection of a holy object towards a devil would be very strong. It might not be able to detect it if it was far away, but it was impossible not to detect it if it was close. Hellion Vivian yawned and lazily communicated with Little White. "I'm just thinking about it." "Not necessarily." At this time Yuan Ming laughed sinisterly. "If it is a real high demon, if he wants to hide, no one will be able to detect it. However, if he is born in the imperial family, the possibility of him falling into the devil's path is very small. But the strange thing is that I found that from the beginning, the retired emperor in the imperial palace was very afraid that the imperial family would fall into the devil's path. So there must be something we don't know. But Vivian, if you don't want to see the royal lose his humanity one day, you can think of a way to help him wash away some of his evil. He has killed too many people." According to the rules of cultivators, if they personally kill tens of thousands of people, they will one day become a demon. In my opinion, the number of people who have died by his hands is about that many. The bloodthirsty smell on his body has become much stronger since you first came into contact with him, but when he held you, he reached an unprecedented level of peace. This is the most special person I have ever seen. He is both interesting and dangerous. When Hellion Vivian heard Yuan Ming's words, her eyes darkened. What do you mean by both interesting and dangerous? It means that if one day he really falls into the devil's path, then no one will be able to stop him. Yuan Ming curved his thin lips, looking as if he was looking forward to it. Hellion Vivian frowned, then looked at Beligaju again. Inexplicably, a sentence that she once saw appeared in her mind. That sentence was like this: if I become a Buddha, there will be no demons in the world. If I become a demon, what can Buddha do to me? Beligaju was such an existence. It was as if he should stand there and look down on all living things high and mighty. When he wore white clothes, he was noble and clean. When he held a booklet in his hand, it was as if he was flipping through ancient Buddhist scriptures. When he wore black clothes, he was evil and dangerous. When his thin lips curved slightly, he let the blood flow freely as if he was enjoying it. Hellion Vivian was not worried that he would fall into the devil's path, but she was concerned about Yuan Ming's words of losing his humanity. She thought about it and decided to go to the hidden spirit temple while she was free these few days. Beligaju naturally did not know that she had made such a decision. His mind was still somewhere else. His voice pulled her thoughts back. Do you not like me to be the emperor? There is nothing to like or dislike. Hellion Vivian took his hand and played with it in the palm of her hand. It's just that I was afraid of trouble in the past. For example, if you become the emperor, you will have to sit in the harem of 3,000 beauties. A person like me will never share you with anyone. But the reality is here. If you don't become the emperor, not to mention other people, whether it is the emperor or the fifth prince, they will not tolerate you. So you can do whatever you want. I can help you take the lead. Beligaju's heart warmed when he heard this. He hugged her and whispered, "Stupid again. Don't you still have little Chi?" Little Chi doesn't want to be the emperor. Hellion Vivian's thin lips were half curved. If he became the emperor, he would definitely eat the entire national treasury. The most important thing was that little Chi liked to fight. With such a small stature sitting on the emperor's throne, it was not funny enough. Beligaju slowly opened his mouth. It is his duty to share the troubles of his elder brother. Being the emperor was a trouble? Hellion Vivian was embarrassed. Don't you like to be in power? A man like him, it was impossible that he did not like the feeling of being in power. There are many ways to be in power. You don't have to be the emperor. Beligaju's voice was slow, as if he was stating a fact. When the time comes, you just need to be the regent. Hellion Vivian finally understood. From the beginning, His Highness had never thought of being the emperor. That was right, it was troublesome to be the emperor. He had to listen to the nagging of those old officials. No matter what he did, he had to bring up the rules of the ancestors. For example, the selection of concubines had broken up the love between the emperor and the empress. If it was just the regent, it would be much easier. Everyone in the world, including the emperor, would have to listen to him. He would not have to wake up early to attend the morning court and would not have to listen to the nagging of others. When the time came, the one who would suffer would be little Chi. Insidious, simply too insidious. Hellion Vivian told Beligaju her evaluation. Who do you think I am doing this for? As Beligaju spoke, he hugged Hellion Vivian from behind and pressed her down on the bed. His slender fingers were not idle. Hellion Vivian saw that the sky was still bright outside and wanted to stand up, but he held her wrist. She had no choice but to reason with him. It is just past noon and such a big thing has happened. There must be officials who want to see you. What if someone comes in later? Then let them wait. Bailey Jiaju's eyes darkened as he planted a kiss on her slightly flustered face. His hand slid down gently, feeling the delicacy of her fingertips that he liked the most. He leaned over and whispered into Hellion Wei's ear, "What's more important than carrying on the royal family's ancestral line, Hearing those words, Hellion Vivian's ears burned. Seeing that he really slid his hand in, her body trembled. "Don't, outside, there are people standing outside, they can hear." Chapter 442. Which time did they not hear us at night? Beligaju smiled evilly. If you don't want them to hear you, just follow my lead and moan softly. Hellion Vivian didn't know that from the beginning, Beligaju didn't want her voice to be heard. As soon as he entered the bedroom, he ordered Eunuch Sun to withdraw all the palace servants outside because he didn't want her voice to be heard. Hellion Vivian didn't know about this. In order not to be heard, she could only bite her thin lips until they turned red. Her eyes were filled with thick mist. Perceiving her thoughts, Bailey Jiaju laughed lowly and sent that seductive and deep laughter into Hellion Wei Wei's small mouth through their intertwined lips. At the same time, his large palm seemed to be kind enough to support her. At the same time, his waist heavily pushed against her. The heat from their close contact penetrated through their clothes and made Hellion Wei Wei tremble fiercely. You really don't want to moan? For Hellion Vivian, that kind of collision was simply destructive. Her fingers couldn't help but clench the tiger skin on the bed. Don't do this. Don't do what? Beligaju suddenly stopped. There was a hint of suppression in his eyes. Otherwise, I'll let you move by yourself? As he spoke, his large palm exerted force and made Hellion Wei Wei sit on his waist. Looking at that silk-like black hair falling down, swaying in an arc that made one's heart itch, his pair of eyes deepened even more. His fingertips elegantly lifted her long hair and his teeth bit her earlobe. Why don't you move? Don't want it? Or is it too comfortable? Hellion Wei Wei sensed that the burning sensation buried within her was getting bigger and bigger. Occasionally it would stir up a person's body and make them go limp and numb. Unfortunately, he kept saying those kinds of shameful words beside her ear. Her whole body felt as if it was on fire, especially when she was looking down at that face that was already dyed with a bit of color because of love. His eyes were like splashed ink, pure and noble. A wisp of hair on his forehead just happened to fall on the corner of his lips, tickling her heart slightly, making her want to go up and lick it. Who knew that when she just grabbed Beligaju's collar, her eyes were dazzled. It was a bone-eroding resistance. That person reached in with a hand, slowly moving around and kneading. The feeling of ecstasy made her mind blank. Hellion Vivian still had a trace of rationality. She heard someone shouting outside, "Your Highness, Lord Zhang wants to see you." Hellion Vivian wanted him to stop, but he simply took advantage of that position and pressed his big palm on her back, starting a series of strength. Your Highness. Lord Zhang also didn't have good eyesight. He couldn't hear the movement inside and still wanted to wait outside. Eunuch Sun's heart was like a mirror. He said in a low voice, "Lord, you should go back first. I think His Highness is busy right now." Lord Zhang didn't give up and called out again, "Your Highness." He heard an echo, but that voice was too hoarse. "Send Lord Zhang out." It was just 6 words, but Lord Zhang's whole body shivered. He asked Eunuch Sun doubtfully, "What's wrong with His Highness? Is he sick?" "Lord Zhang, it's better not to ask. Please go back first." Eunuch Sun answered vaguely. Gradually, Hellion Vivian could no longer hear the movement. However, she was worried that a second person would come, so she could only whisper to him to hurry up. Beligaju smiled evilly. His long and narrow phoenix eyes couldn't help but shine with a beautiful light. His thin lips moved down, and his sharp teeth bit through the obstructing clothes, leaving a burning mark on her left breast. "Don't touch that." Hellion Vivian felt that even her fingertips were numb. Her voice was panting and slightly weak. "Don't." Beligaju seemed to be extremely rough as he leaned over and bit her neck, but he didn't hurt her. His throat let out a low laugh. "Didn't you want me to hurry up?" After he finished speaking, there was a slow and gentle touch. Hellion Vivian couldn't bear this at all. Her fingers couldn't help but tighten. Her whole body was burning. In the end, she let out a broken and hoarse voice. Give me, say that you are mine." Beligaju moved closer to her ear and slowly guided. "Say it and I will give it to you." Hellion Vivian's eyes turned red. I am yours. Good girl." Beligaju kissed her lips. He didn't restrain himself anymore and crazily attacked her. In the large bedroom, other than the sound of collision, there was also the sound of enchanting and moving moans. It wasn't until dinner time that the room finally quieted down. Beligaju asked Eunuch Sun to bring the servants in and put in a bucket of rose water. He personally washed Hellion Vivian's body. Then he carried her to the wooden table and asked her in a low voice, "What do you want to eat?" Hellion Vivian didn't have the strength to eat. Her stomach was very hungry. Her eyes lit up as she looked at the dishes. Every one of them was her favorite. Everything he did seemed natural. He took a pair of bamboo chopsticks from the servant's hand and put a piece of spicy pork ribs next to her mouth. Hellion Vivian took a bite. Her mouth was full of fragrance. After eating a piece, she ate the spicy diced chicken. Even the tea was fed to her by a certain highness. But this time the tea seemed a bit different. She smacked the taste in her mouth. It was probably because something had been added. What is this water? Eunuch's son was preparing the dishes at the side. Now that he heard Hellion Vivian ask, he excitedly replied, "This is what the retired emperor asked this old servant to prepare. After drinking this, I guarantee that within half a month, the princess will be able to give birth to a dragon child." Shouldn't things like giving birth depend on the man's ability? Hellion Vivian didn't want to be a guinea pig who was fed medicine every day. Based on the knowledge she learned in the 21st century, she planned to refute Eunuch Sunday, who knew that as soon as she finished speaking, Eunuch's son immediately said, "Princess, you don't have to worry about this. We also prepared something for the prince. After drinking it, I guarantee that he will definitely be enthusiastic." Wait, why did she feel that the direction of this topic was a bit wrong? Hellion Vivian bit the pork ribs and was about to ask Eunuch's son to change the topic. But then she heard Beligaju slowly say in her ear, "It seems that I should find a time to properly prove my ability. Otherwise, how can I show my enthusiasm? Don't you think so, madam?" Hellion Vivian, they couldn't wait to do it every day. It was just like what was written in the previous contract of marriage. There was no rest. How could he be enthusiastic? "We have done it enough times." Hellion Vivian looked at Beligaju warningly. "Don't think that I will fall into his trap." Beligaju slowly smiled and used a voice that only the two of them could hear. He said in Hellion Vivian's ear, "Madam and I agree on this point. I also feel that the number of times is not a problem, but..." Chapter 443. Our problem is that we should try it in other places. For example, the South study that you find the most exciting. Beligaju continued, his gaze deep and meaningful. Hellion Vivian was speechless. The royal's black-bellied nature had begun to seep into his words and actions. Hellion Vivian couldn't win against him every time, so she simply lowered her head and ate silently. As she ate, she comforted herself that even the overbearing president had to give in to his other half. She couldn't be an exception. Eunuch's son didn't know what the two masters were talking about, but when he saw the two of them talking and laughing, he felt that it would be good if the days continued like this. His Highness was smiling more and more. Not only did the relationship between the young couple not have any problems because of this instigation, it made people feel more comfortable to look at. It seemed that the day to welcome the little Highness was not far away. Eunuch's son thought happily. He was like a busy little bee, happily arranging the dishes. After he was done, he returned to report to the retired emperor. When the retired emperor heard this, he smiled deeply and drank a mouthful of tea. He kept saying, "That's good, that's good." In this servant's opinion, His Highness doesn't have that girl surnamed Yun in his heart at all. Eunuch's son thought of the past and looked at the present. He said firmly, "Maybe there's some misunderstanding." After the retired emperor heard this, the smile on his face sank. Although Ju doesn't show anything on the surface, he cares a lot about how his mother treated him in the past. After all, she's his biological mother and he always wants to be close to her. This emperor still remembers that Ju wasn't as old as little Seven at that time. He was less than 3 years old, but he already knew how to walk on his own. He took the reward and wanted to give it to his mother but was kicked out by her. He asked this emperor grandfather, "Did I do something wrong? Is that why mother doesn't like me?" "Old son, you don't know how sad my heart was when the child asked me this question. That girl with the surname Yun was left behind by his empress mother. She even looked somewhat similar to his empress mother. He will always leave her some face, but this emperor is worried that the divine monk's prophecy. Is the retired emperor afraid that His Highness will fall into the demonic path?" Eunuch's son lowered his voice and said, "This old servant sees that His Highness has restrained himself a lot. With Wang Fei here he will have misgivings." The retired emperor put down the teacup in his hand and looked into the distance. "How can that be called scruples? It's more like he's hiding it even deeper. Just a while ago, those people who said that Wei Wei was a femme fatale were all eliminated by him. More than half of the palace servants who had been serving him recently had also disappeared. If it wasn't for me, he could even hide it from me. Old son, I'm already an old man and I only have a few breaths left to live. Remember, if one day he really shows signs of falling into the devil's path, then do something about it. That's my imperial grandson. I can't bear to see those people from the 4 great clans drag him out, treat him like a monster and besiege him. His pride did not allow him to have a trace of impurity, let alone lose all of his humanity. Even if it wasn't for him, this emperor still has to think about the people of the War Dragon Empire. The imperial family falling into the devil's path is a path of no return. This old servant. Eunuch's son looked at the retired emperor's exhausted face and his voice choked for a moment before he said, "Yes, your majesty. Come out." With the 5th prince locked up like this, the situation in the imperial court changed again. Especially on the 4 great clans' side, they had originally pinned their hopes on the 5th prince. After all, he had been doted on by the emperor for a long time. With his identity as a prince, he could compete with Beligaju. If the 5th prince became the emperor, they would only have one more puppet to help them sweep the world. At that time they could suck as much blood of spirit beasts as they wanted. They didn't have to worry about anything at all. Just like now, the reason why they were so unbridled was because they had lured the current emperor into concocting pills from the very beginning. So what if that person was the emperor? All they wanted was an endless life. But now things were getting more and more out of their control. In addition, the War Dragon army had been secretly investigating something. Their hands and feet were tied when they did things and they were very unhappy. If this goes on, when will we be able to live forever? The eyes of the priest clan's elder, who was wearing a holy robe, turned abnormally red. However, he didn't seem to notice it. He reached out and touched his face. "I don't want to go back to my previous skinny appearance." "It's not just you. We don't want to either." The dragon head walking stick leaned on the ground. The faces of the other 3 elders were gloomy as if they hadn't slept for a few days. "The blood of the sacred beasts is running out. We have to find something to replace it. I heard that the blood of a baby can retain one's youthful appearance. I wonder if it works." "Of course, but you can't do it with great fanfare." A deep voice sounded from behind the beaded curtain. It was elegant and gentle, and the fragrance of tea filled the air. "At present, I still need you to create more resentment. As long as you can break the seal, not only will the dragon god belong to us, but you will also naturally obtain the eternal life you want." Hearing this, the elder's eyes were filled with unprecedented greed. "Then what should we do now?" "I have something here." The man in white stood up and placed the wooden comb in the hands of one of the elders. "You just need to send it to the palace, near where Hellion Wei Wei lives. Then it will be effective." The elders put away the wooden combs, their faces carrying deep and shallow smiles. However, no one knew that just as they were looking forward to eternal life, an invisible shadow was feeding on the greed in their hearts. It was growing bit by bit, and when it grew to a certain extent, it would be able to take over the original owner and replace him. At this moment, in the general's residence, Yun Biluo, who was wearing a cloak, handed a letter to a servant. The letter indicated that Helian Guang Yao and Su Yenmo should receive it. After reading the letter, Su Yenmo sneered, "This bastard is getting more and more capable." "Why?" Helian Guang Yao took the letter and glanced at it. His eyes were filled with venom as he said, "The royal family has always been insidious. This time they might not be helping that bastard, but they can be so ruthless to their own brother. He will definitely be known as an extremely cruel person in the future. When the retired emperor wants him to take over the throne, he will have to think twice." Su Yenmo narrowed her eyes. "It's these 2 people who forced our daughter into a dead end. I must avenge this." "Don't worry, I have arranged for the clan meeting. The hidden army will also send a representative. When the time comes." Chapter 444. She will definitely lose. Helian Guang Yao's fingers tightened around the letter. Although he no longer had any feelings for Su Yenmo, he still had to avenge his beloved daughter. Moreover, he could not let Helian Vivian continue to change. If he did not stop it, he was really worried that the little bastard would climb over his head one day. Therefore, before she became the empress, she had to be completely removed from the family. "Is it true that the bastard has been possessed?" Helian Guang Yao asked Su Yenmo. Su Yenmo sneered, "Most likely. If we can find a way to extract her soul from her body, then no matter how many tricks she has up her sleeve, she can only await death obediently." You have to think of a way in this regard. Helian Guangyao said as he stood up. I will go out for a while to finalize the hidden army. When Su Yenmo heard the hidden army, it was as if she had heard the news of Helian Vivian being expelled from the family like a stray dog. She told herself that soon, in another 2 to 3 days, the little bastard would be utterly defeated. It was nighttime. As the moon swayed, Helian Vivian listened to the subordinates' report indifferently. Her thin lips slowly curled up. Luckily they missed me so much. Tell Qian that we can contact him now. Yes. The mercenaries retreated. Hua Rong's palace was silent again. Beligaju, who was sitting on the soft couch, did not seem to hear the conversation between the two of them. His legs were slightly crossed as he flipped through the ancient scroll in his hand. When he saw Helian Vivian walking in, he hooked his finger at her. Come here. At first, Helian Vivian thought that he was finally going to scold her. However, Beligaju said, I have a gift for you. What gift? Helian Vivian subconsciously took a step back. This was not her fault. Every gift that the royal gave her was not inhumane at all. For example, the collar on her neck. What was he going to give her this time? Cat ears? Helian Vivian's mouth twitched. A woman walked in from the outside. That woman was very beautiful and had an exquisite figure. She wore clothes that still retained her charm. When she landed on the ground, she knelt down and said in a bone-piercing voice, This servant greets the princess. Helian Vivian raised her eyebrows and looked at Beligaju lazily. She chuckled and said, Give me a girl? Your Highness, I don't have any feelings for women. Why don't you give me a man? When Beligaju heard this, his eyes turned cold. Why would I give you a man? Oh no, I accidentally stepped on the tiger's fur. Helian Vivian felt the increasing strength around her waist. She felt a little guilty. Taking a look. Take a look. Beligaju sneered. Helian Vivian. Otherwise, he wouldn't have let her touch him. It seems that Madame thinks that I'm not handsome enough and wants to find another man to take a look. Beligaju lifted her chin with his fingers and looked at her. You can go and look. Let's see if you're faster at finding people or if I'm faster at killing people. Helian Vivian looked at him with a smile. Then I'd better not look. I think that no one is better looking than you. Beligaju's fingers paused. Helian Vivian felt his movements and felt a sense of accomplishment. She finally succeeded in teasing him for once. You're so superficial that you only know how to look at people's appearance. Beligaju pulled her over and interlocked their fingers. His tone was not as cold as before. Helian Vivian admitted that she was a fan of appearance. But other than appearance, she also looked at temperament, character, and cultivation. Although the royal family never had the last two things. But unfortunately, his appearance accounted for more than 99% of it. Helian Weiwei always felt that such a handsome face, coupled with the fact that it would brainwash her from time to time with a meow woof. He deserved to be forgiven no matter what he did. Even if he was shameless at times, she wasn't any better herself. The two of them just happened to be in cahoots. The woman kneeling on the ground bit her thin lips. She had never seen His Highness dote on anyone so much. Originally, she thought that a person like His Highness would not have 7 emotions and 6 desires. He was suitable to sit high and mighty on the dragon throne, ruling over the country. But now, Helian Vivian looked at the woman's eyes and couldn't help but frown. Here it comes again. It seemed that among the women who stayed by Bailey Jiaju's side, very few would not fall for him. Helian Vivian could understand these things. In the Tang sect, there was once a shadow who had a crush on young Master Tang. But from the beginning, young Master Tang had told them that he would treat anyone who dared to have improper thoughts about him to a bullet. At that time she thought it was just a joke. Who would have thought that a shadow would really enter his room while he was drunk? But at that time she stopped breathing. They did not do anything. But they also touched young Master Tang's bottom line. Helian Vivian had never seen such a gloomy young Master Tang. For many years that person had been autistic when he was young. After he grew up, he went to various famous places with a faint smile on his face. He was called the Smiling Fox. He never lost his temper easily, but that day he broke countless wine glasses with a wave of his hand. He sneered as he watched the people send the shadow out. His voice was sinister. No one can make me wrong, my girl. Remember only this once. Helian Vivian realized that he was keeping his chastity for one person. And he would call that person my girl. But even so, it didn't stop some people from secretly liking him. Presumably, Beligaju's situation was the same. Hellion Vivian chuckled as she looked at the girl kneeling in front of her. Her eyes did not leave her at all. Lan Lian, whose thoughts were seen through, suddenly froze. She lowered her eyes, faintly feeling uneasy. It was good that she knew she was uneasy. Hellion Vivian curved her thin lips. "Your Highness, what do you want to do by giving me a girl?" Beligaju did not speak. He only glanced at Lan Lian, who had already stood up. Lan Lian immediately said in a gentle voice, "Princess Consort, this servant has been by Hellion Darren's side all this time. I know Hellion Darren's every move like the back of my hand. He promised me that when the clan meeting is over, I will marry into the defense division." Marry into the general's residence? Wouldn't Su Yen Mo be angered to death? There was no need for further explanation as Hellion Wei Wei understood the reason behind it. She turned her head and looked at Bailey Jiaju. "Was it you who asked Lan Lian to approach Hellion Guangyao on purpose?" Beligaju's voice was calm. "Is there a need for someone like Hellion Guangyao to do it on purpose?" Hellion Vivian smiled and said, "Although he is a beast, he still has a mind of his own. Lan Lian is indeed good to be able to get close to him. Your servant is just following your Highness' orders." Chapter 445. Lan Lian did not understand what Hellion Vivian meant. She must have seen through her intentions. That was why she purposely showed off her cleverness in front of His Highness. She wanted His Highness to let her leave? Lan Lian's eyes dimmed as she thought of this. She continued, "Princess Consort, you flatter me." It turned out that Lan Lian was overthinking things. Hellion Vivian did not think as much as her. She was only thinking about this matter. She tapped her finger on the table beside her. "The day after tomorrow, you will go to the clan meeting with me. Tell them about what happened between you and Hellion Guangyao. There shouldn't be a problem, right?" "Yes." Lan Lian lowered her head again. Her voice was a little unsure. "No problem." Hellion Wei Wei picked up a teacup and spun it between her fingers. "I'm a person who doesn't like to force others to do things. Answer me after you've thought it through. If you really admit to having a relationship with Hellion Guangyao in public, your reputation will be ruined." Lan Lian raised her beautiful eyes slightly and looked at Bailey Jiaju with fluctuating eyes. However, that person did not even look at her. He did not even look at her. Lan Lian could not help but feel disappointed, but the love in her eyes did not diminish. "Princess Consort, this is a mission given to me by His Highness. As long as it is an order from His Highness, I will do my best to complete it. What's more, my reputation will be ruined." These words were obviously directed at Hellion Vivian. She was telling Hellion Vivian about her sacrifice and her unwillingness to give up. At this moment, Beligaju seemed to have her in his eyes. However, after hearing these words, his beautiful eyebrows furrowed slightly. As the person involved, Hellion Vivian only curved her thin lips and said to Beligaju, "You go out. I have something to tell Lan Lian in private." "I go out?" Beligaju's eyes darkened. He only had one thought now, and that was to kill Lan Lian. Why did these people have to act as if there was something going on between them in front of her? A vicious aura emerged from his eyes, so piercing that it pierced the bones. Lan Lian's body trembled as her face paled. How could she forget about His Highness' temper? "You want to kill someone in front of me?" Hellion Vivian smiled and squeezed his hand. However, in the blink of an eye, Beligaju resumed his half-smile. He picked her up and said gently, "How could that be? Don't always misunderstand your husband." Hellion Vivian. Misunderstanding? If she didn't reach out to stop him, she was afraid that the person standing in front of her would be a corpse. "Also, you can say whatever you want. You can pretend that I don't exist." Beligaju lowered his head and kissed her forehead. Hellion Vivian was helpless. He was so tall and had such a strong aura. How could she ignore his existence? Beligaju's thin lips curled up. He removed her hand from her forehead and continued, "If there's anything that you can't explain clearly during your conversation, wouldn't you be wrongly accusing your husband? We haven't even started talking yet. Where did the word wrongly come from?" Hellion Vivian sighed, "Forget it. Lan Lian, you can leave first. I'll talk to you again when I have time." "Yes." Lan Lian responded as if she had just escaped a calamity. She really didn't want His Highness to know about the love that she had kept hidden for a long time. However, Beligaju's voice rang out at this time. Since you don't want to talk to her, I'll do it. As he spoke, he coldly looked towards Lan Lian. Lan Lian's body immediately stiffened and she knelt on the ground with a thud. Beligaju walked towards her in a somewhat absent-minded manner. Do you like me? Lan Lian abruptly raised her head as her face burned. This subordinate. This highness doesn't like you. Beligaju didn't wait for her to finish before he spoke in an indifferent tone. This highness has never done anything to make you think that I'm interested in you. Lan Lian bit her thin lips, wanting to explain. Beligaju didn't give her any chance to speak. Now tell me properly. What were you trying to prove with your words just now? This subordinate wasn't trying to prove anything. Lan Lian's tears began to flow. I was just speaking the truth. Beligaju swept a glance at her and smiled evilly. Speaking the truth? Do you take this highness for a fool? It seems that this highness' methods have been too gentle recently. That's why people like you have misconceptions that you shouldn't have. Your highness. Lan Lian choked with sobs. Her enchanting eyes were stained with tears. This subordinate really likes you. Just based on this point, does this subordinate deserve to die? In any case, she had already come to this point. She might as well say it all out. Beligaju didn't say anything else. A gloomy look slid from the corner of his eyes and turned into a black fog. He didn't want to kill anyone in front of this little thing, but these people just had to be so blind. There's nothing wrong with liking someone. Hellion Vivian reached out to hold Beligaju's wrist as she spoke in a calm voice. What's wrong is that the person you like already has a family. It's fine if you don't give up, but you still dare to provoke me in front of my face? Lan Lian, only love that doesn't hurt a third person is called love. Any attempt to interfere with other people's thoughts isn't called disregarding one's own safety, it's called making a fool of oneself. If Beligaju also likes you and has expressed his feelings for you, then it takes two hands to clap. You should take him away. I, Hellion Vivian, never want a man who's half-hearted. Now that I'm together with my husband, you still want to interfere? Ah, Lan Lian, I don't care who you like in your heart because that's your own business. But if you don't have boundaries, I can immediately make you pack up your things and get out of the palace. I have 100 ways to make a mistress suffer a fate worse than death. Do you want to try it? It's better for you to put away all those thoughts and be a good servant. If a woman wasn't ruthless, her status wouldn't be stable. This was a sentence that Hellion Vivian deeply believed in. Just like what she said, she wouldn't stop anyone from liking Beligaju. After all, that was the right of others. But after provoking her, she still felt wronged. She didn't mind letting her have a taste of her methods. If Beligaju was also involved in this, then she wouldn't even care about this matter. She would just let go and leave. It was probably because her father was snatched away by a mistress. She had suffered from emotional cleanliness since she was young. Either one of them would grow old together or she would stay where she was. She was a person who couldn't rub sand in her eyes. It had always been like this. Almost all of Lan Lian's thoughts were seen through by Hellion Vivian, which made her feel an unusual sense of shame and fear. Only now did she understand why His Highness had come over. He really wanted to kill her. If it wasn't for the new princess stopping him, she was afraid that her blood would immediately splatter. What others could see through, His Highness would naturally see through as well. Chapter 446. She was too stupid to provoke the Princess Consort verbally, but she forgot that His Highness could see through it too. His Highness had clearly expressed that he didn't like her. Come to think of it, he had never looked at her more than once. This time, if she hadn't been given the task to lie in ambush beside Hellion Guangyao, he wouldn't even have been able to call her name. Whether it was her or Heizhu, they were just code names in his eyes. Thinking of this, Lan Lian knelt on the ground as if she had suddenly recognized her duty. She kowtowed loudly, Princess Consort, I won't dare to do it again. Please give this subordinate another chance, Princess Consort and His Highness. From today onwards, this subordinate will be a good subordinate's Deadpool. I won't have any improper thoughts. That man who was as unattainable as the moon was not hers. No matter how good that person was, he was different from the other members of the royal family. He was already someone else's. She had been in contact with so many men, no matter how heroic they were just lechers who abandoned their wives. Only His Highness was different. Perhaps this was the reason why she liked His Highness. However, it was too late. She didn't believe that the Princess Consort would keep her. a servant who had designs on His Highness in the palace. The Princess Consort was magnanimous enough to stop His Highness from killing her. Asking her to stay was simply a fantasy. She reckoned that the Princess Consort would find an excuse to send her away. Lan Lian bowed her head and smiled bitterly. But what she didn't expect was that Hellion Vivian actually replied with a faint Lan Lian looked up in disbelief, her eyes swaying back and forth. Beligaju was obviously not satisfied with this decision. His fingers rubbed Hellion Vivian's wrist, warning her. Hellion Vivian knew that this guy needed to be comforted, so she stood on her tiptoes and patted his head, meaning to say, "Good boy." Beligaju was amused. Did she really think of him as a cat or a dog? Lan Lian was deeply shocked. Why? Why do you want me to stay? She didn't think that Hellion Vivian was kind-hearted. After hearing her words just now, she knew that she wasn't that easy to bully. Only those who like him can risk their lives to protect him. Hellion Vivian's voice sounded a little faint as she said, "Actually, I can let you go. However, once you leave this palace, firstly, you will harbor resentment. Secondly, I'm afraid that he will make a move before I can make a move. His hands are stained with too much blood, it's better to reduce it." In the end, every consideration was for His Highness. When Lan Lian heard Hellion Vivian's words, she finally understood why she had lost. Compared to Wang Fei, her love was so thin that it wasn't even worth mentioning. She had always thought that she was smart. But now, when she saw Hellion Vivian lazily leaning against His Highness like a cat, she realized that her cultivation was too shallow. If it was said that before, she still had the thought of waiting for His Highness to look back and take a good look at her. But now she didn't have such thoughts at all. She didn't have Hellion Vivian's boldness. When she stood beside His Highness, her heart was beating rapidly, but at the same time she was afraid of him. After all, accompanying the Emperor was like accompanying a tiger. However, Hellion Vivian didn't. That woman was almost as dazzling as His Highness. Just this conversation today, she said so much just to leave a good reputation for His Highness. Lan Lian admitted that she couldn't do this because she didn't even think of that level. In other words, she only cared about whether she could get it or not, and never considered His Highness. Ah, Hellion Vivian, she was indeed the successor of the Hellion family who could resurrect the Hellion family. Wang Fei. Lan Lian looked up, her eyes were filled with voluntary submission. "Please bring me along when you attend the clan meeting. I have a way to help you deal with Hellion Guangyao." Hellion Vivian looked at her and smiled. "I don't need you to deal with Hellion Guangyao." Lan Lian's fingers stiffened and she said with difficulty, "Wang Fei, do you still not believe me? Do you think that I changed too quickly? I just suddenly thought it through. No." Before Lan Lian could finish, Hellion Vivian yawned and said, "It's true that you don't have to deal with Hellion Guangyao. I have a way to deal with him. You have to deal with someone else. When the time comes, there will be a lot of dog blood. It will be more exciting." Lan Lian's eyes lit up. Wang Fei, you mean to say that you've decided to bring me to the clan meeting?" "Yes," Hellion Vivian replied slowly, looking like she was sleepy, her eyelids drooping. Lan Lian knew that it was not suitable for her to stay any longer, so she left respectfully. Ever since then, her impression of Hellion Vivian had changed, and she would praise Hellion Vivian to everyone she met. Beligaju's heart was very warm. Previously, he thought that this gift was purely to create trouble for him, until he heard Hellion Vivian's words. The beast in his heart seemed to be controlled. She tried her best to keep his hands clean. The next time he killed someone, he might consider sparing their lives. "Why aren't you talking?" Hellion Weiwei was so sleepy that she couldn't take it anymore. She buried her head in his shoulder and rubbed her face back and forth. Then she shook her furry head to make herself look smarter. Beligaju reached out and carried her horizontally, his voice faint. "If you're sleepy, just sleep. Why do you keep shaking your head?" Hellion Vivian felt very comfortable in such an embrace, so she closed her eyes after a while. She realized that he had put her on the bed, so she subconsciously reached out and grabbed his sleeve. Her mouth unconsciously said, "No, I want to sleep." Bailey Jiaju stared blankly for a moment. He laughed in spite of himself and kissed her ear. I won't touch you. When you wake up, lift your arms first. Don't sleep in a coat. It's uncomfortable." Hellion Weiwei actually cooperated. She took off her outerwear and comfortably sank into his chest that smelled like sandalwood. Beligaju reached out and hugged her, resting his chin on her head and gently rubbing it. There was a faint smile on his face, which was unprecedentedly gentle and dangerous. What to do? He couldn't let go of this person in his arms. One day he fell into hell. He wanted to pull her down with him. People said that too many feelings were to fulfill one's wish. But he just wanted to hold this person tight, hold her tight forever. Beligaju took a deep breath and suppressed the fog in his eyes. Beligaju took a deep breath and suppressed the fog in his eyes. When he opened his eyes again, they were pure and holy. He lifted her chin and kissed the corner of her lips. Don't ever betray me. Never ever. Chapter 447. After saying that, Beligaju's fingers stiffened. Then he immediately frowned and said, "Come out." Fire Chilin's figure appeared faintly. It looked at Beligaju worriedly and said, "Master, your aura. It will be fine in 2 days." Bailey Jiaju seemed to know what it was going to say. Without waiting for Fire Chilin, he cut it off. He tilted his head and draped his outer robe over Helian Weiwei's body before he slowly stood up. Fire Chilin didn't relax its vigilance because of this. Was it just an illusion? Why did it feel that the smell of blood on its master had increased a lot recently? It didn't know if this news was good or bad for its master. It only knew one thing, and that was that nothing must happen to Helian Vivian. Something happened to Helian Vivian. Its master who lost his soul fragment would definitely lose his humanity. It had to find the last soul fragment as soon as possible before the seal was completely destroyed. The strange thing was that even if it opened its all-seeing eye and recovered to its previous level, it still couldn't see the information of its master's last soul fragment. It didn't know what happened to its master at that time. The only thing it was sure of was that it knew better than the green dragon and the sky-devouring beast that its master didn't die. It was just that he chose to sleep. Or maybe it was because of some reason that he fell into a deep sleep. In order to not be found by anyone, its master scattered his soul everywhere. His main soul entered the path of reincarnation. At that time, it was severely injured and couldn't find any trace of its master. Because it was its master's contracted divine beast and its master specially gave it guidance. It found its master after 1,000 years. Now, the green dragon was locked in the green dragon lake. It couldn't appear. Once it appeared around the green dragon, they were incompatible like fire and water. Without its master, it would definitely create a great war between humans. The only one who could suppress this matter, the sky-devouring beast, was nowhere to be found. The sky-devouring beast was different from them. Its fate with its master was innate. Logically speaking, wherever its master appeared, the sky-devouring beast would definitely appear. Why couldn't it sense the sky-devouring beast's aura after so many years? Could it be that it was already dead? Or perhaps they were locked up in some place? Or was it because Master's soul was not complete so he could not summon him? Even now, the Fire Chilin still couldn't make sense of this. His eyes darkened and he decided to make a trip to the demon area. Because it was not sure what the last piece of its master's soul was. Night fell. Helian Vivian started having nightmares again. The scenery in the dream was the same and so were the people. However, this time the Helian Vivian was clearly much better than before. She was no longer as thin and transparent as before, as if a gust of wind could blow her away. It was as if it was slowly materializing. Even his fingers felt slightly cold. The moment she touched Helian Vivian's neck, she was shaken awake by Beligaju. He looked at her with eyes as dark as the night, with a breath that made people feel at ease. "You have been having nightmares recently. Are you not used to sleeping in the palace?" "A little." It was unknown who had said that the Imperial Palace was the place with the heaviest resentment. People with poor birth characters should never enter the Imperial Palace at night. In the Imperial Palace, there were countless palace servants who had jumped into the river, not to mention those concubines who had framed each other. None of them knew how they had died. If the resentment was too heavy, it was not a good thing for Helian Vivian. She was a person who had been possessed. The resentment seemed to be able to affect the Helian Vivian in the dream. It was a bit like feeding her nutrients. Helian Vivian thought of this. Her eyes narrowed and she reached out to pour herself a cup of water. When she looked up, she found that he had already picked up the teacup on the bedside and put it to her lips. Helian Vivian smiled, lowered her head and drank 2 mouthfuls. Beligaju put down the teacup in his hand, then took out a handkerchief to help her wipe the sweat on the corner of her mouth and forehead. Helian Vivian didn't want to wipe it, so she moved away from his hand. She buried her face in his arms, rubbed against him and fell asleep again. This time there were no nightmares. When she woke up, there were obvious water stains on Beligaju's clothes, Hellion Vivian looked at the handsome face that was still in deep sleep, then looked at the water stains. She decisively chose to escape at the last minute. Based on His Highness's degree of mysophobia, the first thing he would do when he woke up was to grab her, pin her down on the soft bed and teach her a lesson. She still had to attend the clan meeting in the afternoon, so she couldn't waste her energy on this kind of thing. Hellion Vivian had a good idea. Her feet were nimble and she didn't make much noise. But just as she took the outer garment, she heard the person behind her ask, "Where are you going?" Hellion Vivian's fingers paused. She felt someone holding her waist from behind. Probably because he had just woken up, his voice sounded deeper and hoarser than usual. "You dirted my clothes and you want to escape? I want to prepare breakfast for you." Hellion Vivian smiled faintly and said very naturally. Beligaju looked at her, then suddenly turned his face and kissed her most sensitive ear. Hellion Vivian shivered, and the big hand that was holding her pulled her back to the bed. "Instead of running away, why don't you let me punish you first? Then I'll find an excuse to let you go tonight." Just like that, Hellion Wei Wei was pressed into the crimson quilt. Thousands of black strands fell down, matching her face that was dyed crimson. It was extremely beautiful. What Bailey Jiaju liked the most was none other than this appearance of hers. He watched as her thin lips slightly opened and lightly panted. He slowly tore apart that obstructing long skirt and forcefully broke in with his waist. Compared to before, the two of them were more and more compatible. Every time they made love, they could bring extreme pleasure to each other. His Highness was a man of his word. Just like he said he would punish her once. But this time it took too long. Hellion Wei Wei did not know how many times she had almost cried out when she was knocked into. Maybe it was because of the morning, but His Highness was more than a little energetic. Outside, someone was already calling out to Hellion Wei Wei with a puzzled tone, "Princess Consort? Are you inside or have you left?" Strange, at this time His Highness should have gone to morning court. Furthermore, Wang Fei had clearly instructed him to wake her up when it was time because Wang Fei still had important matters to attend to. Why was it that no one responded to him now? That young eunuch couldn't keep standing at the entrance of the palace, so he raised his voice and said, "Then Princess Consort, this servant will first send this person away." Wait a minute. Chapter 448. Hellion Vivian did not know what he was talking about. Her long hair swayed as she fell into a numbness that could not be shaken off. Even her tailbone felt as if it was electrocuted. She only wanted him to go faster and be more ruthless. "Don't rush, beautiful things have to be done slowly." Beligage's voice was getting softer and softer. It was so low that it made people tremble. When it was at its limit, Hellion Vivian's voice was trembling as she asked him to let her go. Compared to the past, the royal family did let her go this time. They only took less than 2 hours to release her. But this was still very beastly. If it was converted to modern time, it would be almost 2 hours. Hellion Vivian supported her slightly sore waist. She was not as tired as before. She did not know if it was because of the medicine or the beast pill, but she felt more refreshed. The mercenary looked at the young lord and finally heaved a sigh of relief. He thought that something had happened to the young lord, which was why she had not come for so long. Now it seemed that everything was going smoothly. "The clan meeting will begin in an hour." Hellion Vivian flipped through the ancient scroll in her hand and smiled. "Let's talk as we walk." "Yes." The mercenary lowered his eyes respectfully and followed Hellion Vivian outside. It was just past noon and the weather was sunny. There was a square house in Mao Air Alley, the 8th largest alley in the capital. In addition to training martial arts and accepting disciples, that residence was used to worship the ancestors of the Hellion clan. Every year at the end of the 8th month or the beginning of the 9th month, a clan meeting would be held. In front of the ancestors, they would evaluate whether or not the successor had the qualifications to take charge of the clan. At this time the house was filled with people. Other than the most eye-catching seats, the rest of the seats were all stewards of the family branches. "Look, the old master is here." It was not known which steward said this sentence, but everyone raised their eyes, their hands holding teacups as they watched Hellion Guangyao walk in with a face full of determination. He sat upright on the seat that old Master Hellion used to sit in back then, his eyes looking down at the steward below, his face full of complacency. Su Yenmo, on the other hand, was the lady who accompanied him. She sat beside him in a dignified manner, looking virtuous and generous. Seeing that the couple had taken their seats, the stewards who were drinking tea below all stopped talking and looked up at Helian Guangyao. Helian Guangyao glanced at the empty seat and said coldly, "Why? Didn't anyone inform the selected representatives of the clan meeting? The clan meeting is an important event for the Helian family. Can't they be late?" The steward sitting on Helian Guangyao's right side opened his mouth and spoke in a low voice. "Master, that is the seat of the eldest Mississippi. There is news from the palace saying that she will be arriving later. However, please rest assured that there is still a joss stick's worth of time before the headquarters. After a joss stick's worth of time, the eldest miss will certainly arrive." Helian Guangyao's face was covered with a layer of frost after hearing the steward's words. Su Yenmo, on the other hand, seemed to be quite understanding. This girl Wei Wei has been unruly since she was young. Now that she is the princess consort, it is inevitable that her arrogance will grow. We can wait, but stewardly, look at how many stewards are below and how many of them are here. Even though Wei Wei is the princess consort, she shouldn't make so many people wait. However, right at this moment, just as she finished speaking, the wooden door was pushed open with a bang. Before the person entered, the voice was heard and the fragrance lingered in the air. "The clan meeting hasn't started yet. It shouldn't be considered waiting." Hearing this, everyone raised their heads and looked at the door. They saw a slender and cold figure walking towards them slowly. She was dressed in an ivory long robe, her long black chestnut hair was spread out behind her back. She was beautiful and alluring. Her face was not painted with a trace of rouge, but it made people think of the word fairy. Who else could it be but Helian Wei Wei? Who else could it be? She was not alone. There were two mercenaries walking side by side beside her. Both of them were from the hidden army. On their black clothes there were pistols for action. They looked ordinary, but each of them had extraordinary skills. However, no one knew their identity. Seeing Helian Vivian, Su Yenmo could not control the hatred in her eyes. However, she knew better than anyone that now was not the time to tear this little bastard apart. Once the clan meeting was over, this little bastard would naturally be treated as a stray dog and be chased out. There was already a history of being chased out of the family, and if this happened again, this little bastard would be completely removed from the Helian family. Su Yenmo held the cup of tea in her hand and took a big sip. She told herself to be patient and not be impatient. She just had to sit and watch how Helian Guangyao would slap that little bastard in the face. Helian Guangyao didn't have any expression on his face. He only glanced at Helian Wei Wei in a neither light nor heavy manner. Using his identity as the head of the family, he swept his gaze over the surroundings. Since everyone is present, then let's begin. However, other than the experienced stewards, the rest of the younger generation who came from all over did not know Helian Vivian and were whispering to each other. "Who is this woman? She's so beautiful. I don't know, but judging from her aura, she seems to have a high status in the family. She has a high status, but Madame Su doesn't like her? Although I didn't hear what Madame Su said just now, it seems like the two of them are not on good terms. Let's ask her properly when she comes later. This is the first time I've seen such a beautiful woman. I wonder if she's married. Do you really not know? She's the Helian Vivian we met during the test last time." One of them finally pointed out Helian Vivian's identity. The younger generation who came from the outer city were all shocked. Their eyes were filled with disbelief as they looked at Helian Vivian intensely. How is this possible? You're not in the capital, so you don't know. Helian Vivian's face has recovered long ago. Not only that, she was chosen as the princess consort by the royal family. Also, the profound heaven that you guys wanted to visit when you first came was also owned by her. The more the crowd listened, the more interesting their expressions became. They remembered that when they first came, Helian Wei Wei was only 10 years old. Not to mention that she was ugly, she didn't have the slightest bit of martial chi. Her temperament was also not likable, she was extremely rude. In the end, when they watched her take the test, she got the worst. She was simply the disgrace of the Helian family. They respected her as the granddaughter of Old Master Helian, but they also looked down on her from the bottom of their hearts. The stewards of the family also directly disqualified her from participating in the clan meeting due to various interests. So what if she was the heir of the most orthodox bloodline? She was just a piece of trash. There was no way she could make a name for herself. But now. Chapter 449. The crowd raised their heads and stared at the extraordinary face. They could not help but feel a little dazed. The Hellion Vivian in front of them was no longer the good-for-nothing she used to be. There seemed to be something about her that had never been there before. She exuded a cool handsomeness with just her gestures. Under the watchful eyes of the crowd, Hellion Vivian strolled towards the main seat. Her imposing manner was overwhelming. Her voice was not loud, but it was loud enough for everyone to hear. "This seems to be my seat." Hellion Guangyao heard her words and did not react for a moment. When he understood what she meant, the crowd below was in an uproar. The discussion of the stewards was like a tidal wave. Rumors were spreading everywhere. Hellion Guangyao's face darkened. His pair of shrewd and vicious eyes stared straight at Hellion Vivian. "This is not the place for you to create trouble. Go back to your seat. Don't break the rules set by our ancestors before the congregation even starts. Even if you are the third princess consort now, you should know what is etiquette, justice, integrity, and shame." "Of course I know what is etiquette, justice, integrity, and shame," Hellion Vivian said slowly in a calm voice. "Perhaps Mr. Guangyao has forgotten. I am the true heir of the Hellion bloodline, and you are just a son-in-law who married into the family. When I was not qualified to participate in the congregation in the past, I did not care who took this seat. Now that I have the qualifications, shouldn't you also give me the position that belongs to me?" When Hellion Guangyao heard the word son-in-law, anger rushed to his head. He slammed the wooden table heavily. "Hellion Vivian, I will say it again. Even if you are the princess consort, you cannot break the rules set by our ancestors. If you can't stand it, you can withdraw from the congregation now." "The rules set by our ancestors?" Hellion Wei smiled and called out, "Manager Zhang, I'll have to trouble you to tell Mr. Guangyao what the rules of the Hellion family are." The steward who was called out could not sit still. Cold sweat broke out on his forehead, but he did not speak. Hellion Vivian glanced at him with a faint smile. "You don't want to say? It doesn't matter. I have a family tree here. It clearly states that if the head of the family passes away, someone with the bloodline of the family will preside over the meeting and take the seat of honor. Regardless of age, as long as they are qualified, they can take the seat. It's impossible for the stewards present not to know about this, right?" No one spoke and the scene was extremely quiet. Hellion Vivian didn't seem to notice the suppressed anger on Hellion Guangyao's face. Her pretty eyebrows raised slightly. "Mr. Guangyao, please give up your seat." Hellion Guangyao's entire body tensed up due to his anger. His eyes were as sharp as a knife as they shot towards Hellion Vivian. Hellion Vivian chuckled. "Why? Does Mr. Guangyao not wish to abide by my Hellion family's rules?" At this moment Hellion Guangyao finally noticed that from the moment she entered the door, she intentionally removed his surname. The reason for that was obvious. Su Yenemo was sitting at the side. Her eyes moved and her tone sounded like a peacemaker. Did Wei Wei forget because she was young back then? In the family, if the successor is not qualified and is not of age, the elder has the right to take charge of the family on behalf of the successor. Madame Su also said that it is to take charge of the family on behalf of the successor, not to take over the seat. Hellion Wei glanced at the surroundings with a smile that wasn't a smile. Her gaze fell on Hellion Guangyao. "Mr. Guangyao, I'm still here, yet you're sitting in my seat. You're taking my family property for granted. Aren't you a bit too shameless?" Hellion Guangyao clenched his fists. Hellion Vivian sneered. "Give up your seat." The discussion below was still going on and everyone was looking at Hellion Guangyao. Hellion Guangyao forcibly suppressed the anger in his chest and said coldly, "I, Hellion Guangyao, have been working hard for the prosperity of the Hellion family for so many years. Even if I don't contribute, I should at least contribute. I didn't expect to be misunderstood like this. Forget it, once the clan meeting is over, everyone will know what's right and what's wrong." Hellion Vivian ignored his hypocritical remarks and looked at him with a smile. No matter how much this person said, he still had to give up his seat for her. Hellion Guangyao did have to give up his seat, but he believed that this little bastard would only be able to bask in glory for half an hour. After a while it was time to vote. How did she get that seat? He would let her get it back on her own. Hellion Guangyao stood up and strode to the seat at the side. That seat was not low, but compared to Hellion Vivian's seat, it was a few levels lower. Hellion Vivian did not sit down immediately. Instead, she glanced at Su Yenmo, who was sitting next to the seat, and her gaze turned colder. That seat was supposed to be her mother's. In her memory, her mother was dressed in military attire and sat next to her grandfather, managing such a large family. What right did this woman have to sit there? Hellion Vivian smiled, but the smile did not reach her eyes. She looked at Su Yenmo and did not speak to her. Instead, she called out again, "Steward Zhang." The steward did not understand why the princess was thinking about him today. He responded awkwardly, "Huh? How can a concubine who has nothing to do with my family sit in the second-in-command seat at the clan meeting?" Hellion Vivian said coldly, "I haven't participated in the clan meeting for 7 years. Is the family so unprincipled?" Not only Steward Zhang but the other stewards also had to think twice when they heard this. Su Yenmo sitting in that seat was already extremely against the rules. Now that she was picked out by Hellion Vivian, it was inevitable. Steward Zhang was not as hesitant as when he was facing Hellion Guangyao. He reached out his hand and said, "Madam, why don't you change your seat?" Apart from that one time when she was reflecting on herself on the streets, Su Yenmo had never suffered such a huge loss in front of so many people like today. However, under such circumstances, it was not up to her to say no. She had prepared for the entire day for this clan meeting. Even the clothes were specially chosen. She wanted to use this opportunity to win back her reputation. Now that she was being forced to change her seat, Su Yenmo's chest was about to explode. However, she maintained a smile on her face. "I was careless. I only thought that in these few years, I had already regarded myself as a member of the Hellion family, but I couldn't avoid being ostracized. Just like what Guangyao said, we'll see how it goes after the clan meeting." As she spoke, she stood up. She wanted to sit next to Hellion Guangyao, but realized that there was no seat left. She could only stand awkwardly at the side, her eyes filled with venom. She wanted to see how that little bastard would be so arrogant when the hidden army appeared later. Chapter 450. Hellion Vivian did not even look at Su Yenmo's eyes. Her long robe fluttered in the wind as she crossed her long legs and sat on the main seat. She looked down at the stewards below and took a deep breath. For 7 years she did not even have the right to step into the clan meeting. 7 years later she was sitting in this seat again, the seat that originally belonged to her grandfather. Hellion Vivian narrowed her eyes, as if this was the only way she could calm down the surging emotions in her blood. Calm down. This was nothing. The show had just begun. Hellion Wei curled her lips into a smile and signaled for the congregation to begin. The stewards looked at each other, and one of the stewards with more seniority spoke in an old and deep voice. "Since this clan meeting is different from the previous ones, we shall not waste any more time." As early as half a month ago, the notice of the clan meeting was sent out. Since the death of the old master, although the Hellion clan has not declined, it has not been as glorious as before. An acting patriarch is not enough to unite everyone. We need to choose a real patriarch. Now there are 10 clan leader candidates present at the clan meeting. After today, one of them will become the clan leader. I believe all the stewards already have a candidate in mind. For the sake of fairness, let's raise our hands to vote now. The steward said that there were 10 candidates. However, those who truly understood the intricacies of this matter knew that in reality, it was just a competition between Hellion Guangyao and Hellion Vivian, who had the orthodox bloodline. For 7 years, Hellion Guangyao, the son-in-law, had controlled all the power in the Hellion clan. Hellion Wei used to be a good-for-nothing, so Hellion Guangyao naturally replaced her with Li Taoxing. That's right, the Hellion clan was built single-handedly by the Old Master. If it was not for the Old Master's lifetime of military exploits, the Hellion clan would not be so glorious. However, Hellion Guangyao had been in power for so many years, how could he let go so easily? Now Hellion Vivian wanted to take back the authority of the clan. Not only did she need to ask Hellion Guangyao for his permission, she also needed to ask the stewards behind Hellion Guangyao if they were willing. From the very beginning, they had already disobeyed Old Master Huoyan's will and followed Hellion Guangyao. After so many years they had reaped a lot of benefits. If Hellion Vivian took over, not only would they benefit, but Hellion Vivian would also dig up all the ungrateful deeds they had done in the past. Therefore, from a certain perspective, it would not be easy for Hellion Vivian to take back what belonged to her. Many people could not see the result of Hellion Vivian. They looked at each other and shook their heads. Hellion Vivian calmly sipped the tea in her hand, as if no matter what happened around her, it had nothing to do with her. The first 8 candidates did not get a single vote. Hellion Guangyao watched as the stewards acted according to his plan. Being driven to the side, a shrewd light appeared in the corner of his eyes. That's it. He wanted her to take a good look and see just who would inherit the Hellion bloodline. Next, Hellion Vivian. When Steward Zhang said Hellion Vivian's name, there was another round of whispers outside the hall. Neither servile nor overbearing Wei Wei stood up. Her long robe fluttered in the wind, her sleeves fluttered in the wind. Just as I said before, 7 years ago I was young and didn't know any better. I was used by others and I was also poisoned. My behavior and style inevitably made everyone disappointed. Now that I have recovered, I will certainly make the entire divine continent respect my Hellion bloodline. No one can provoke us. These words stunned the people below. One must know that this idea was once Old Master Hellien's greatest wish when he was alive. Apart from Old Master Hellion, no one dared to boast like this. Was it because they were related by blood? The crowd lowered their eyes and pondered. However, Hellion Guangyao laughed without a trace of warmth. He said sarcastically, Wei Wei, some things can't be solved just by talking. You have never been involved in the family's affairs since you were young. How much do you know about the family's affairs? A good patriarch can't solve problems just by being hot-blooded. At this point, Hellion Guangyao did not give Hellion Vivian a chance to speak. He turned to Steward Zhang and said, All right, let's continue with the voting. Steward Zhang nodded and exchanged glances with Hellion Guangyao. He raised his hand and gestured for the stewards to continue. Su Yanemo felt relieved when she saw this. She took a sip of tea and thought to herself, that little bastard probably doesn't know that they had bribed the stewards from the very beginning. Other than Steward Zhang, who was their confidant, the other stewards had also taken advantage of them. They were waiting for the start of the clan meeting to oust Hellion Vivian. Although there was an old man among them whom they did not manage to deal with. However, there was only one person. With 9 votes against 1, it was obvious who would win. Su Yanemo put down the teacup and looked at Hellion Wei Wei as if she was waiting for a good show. Come everyone, let's vote together. After Steward Zhang finished speaking, he saw that Old Master Zhang was the only one who raised his hand. He did not take this round seriously and said with a smile, Since no one is voting, then let's, whoosh. A series of rustling sounds suddenly interrupted his voice. Steward Zhang choked in disbelief. He looked at the stewards who raised their hands and subconsciously looked at Hellion Guangyao. Hellion Guangyao was stunned. His eyes widened in an instant as if he suddenly thought of something. His face was full of shock, followed by unconcealable anger. Su Yanemo could not hold it in anymore. How could this be? Why did they choose Hellion Vivian? You all of you. Hellion Guangyao did not say anything. He was so angry that his chest heaved up and down as if he was trying to control his emotions. One of the stewards smiled and said, Brother Guangyao, don't be like this. In this day and age, of course, we will side with whoever gives us more money. Hellion Guangyao heard this and his face darkened. However, he knew that it was useless to be angry at this time. He turned his head and said to Hellion Vivian, I have underestimated your methods. Mr. Guangyao seems to have forgotten that you were the one who used your methods first. I only saw that Mr. Guangyao's methods were not bad, so I added some money on top of that. Hellion Wei Wei casually sat in the main seat, her fingertips propping up the side of her face. She raised her eyebrows and glanced at Hellion Guangyao. Manager Zhang is your confidant, so I didn't touch him. As for the rest, everyone followed their own hearts and made the choice. 9-1, I think you all planned to do this at the beginning. Unfortunately, it's me who gets 9, and you who gets 1. Chapter 451. Following Hellion Vivian's last sentence, Hellion Guangyao's usually arrogant face showed unprecedented anxiety and uneasiness. Su Yanemo was anxious as well. She walked towards Hellion Guangyao as if asking him what they should do now. Hellion Vivian looked at the 2 people standing in front of her and recalled how she was kicked out of the family in the past. She was forced to leave, forced to lose everything she had, and the pain and regret of her mother before her death. All of this made Hellion Vivian's eyes turn cold like never before. Steward Zhang, are you mute? Don't you know how to announce the result? When Hellion Vivian was unhappy, her imposing manner was comparable to Beligaju. Steward Zhang was so scared that his whole body trembled. He said in a trembling voice, I announce. Wait a minute. Hellion Guangyao interrupted him, his side profile cold. I didn't want to announce this matter so soon. Before the old master passed away, he said that if anyone could win the support of the hidden army, 1 vote would be equivalent to 10 votes. Do all the stewards still remember this? The stewards did not say anything because they had all sucked in a deep breath when they heard the words, 3 hidden soldiers. Everyone present knew that it had been 10 years since the hidden army had last seen them. For 10 years, they had tried every method to find out the whereabouts of the hidden army, but to no avail. Even if they occasionally heard news about them, it was of no use at all. The hidden army only followed the old master from the beginning to the end. Guangyao, you mentioned the hidden army now. Do you know where they are? One of the stewards could not hold back his excitement and stood up as well. Hellion Guangyao tilted his chin up and smiled arrogantly. Of course, to be honest, I have been exchanging letters with the current leader of the hidden army for a few days now. He will be attending the clan meeting this time as well. He will be sitting in the audience below. Really? The other stewards also started talking at once. Hellion Guangyao laughed again. I have no reason to lie to all of you. In order for the Hellion bloodline to develop better, the most important thing is to find the hidden army. Therefore, during this period of time I have been working hard to find the hidden army. Unfortunately, others have taken advantage of this loophole. Everyone was well aware of who this bystander was referring to. The stewards looked at Hellion Vivian hesitantly and lowered their voices. Princess Consort, according to what Old Master said before he died, the hidden army is indeed more important. The position of the clan leader of the Zhong Hui, why don't you? The hidden army isn't here yet. Isn't it a little too soon for Manager Su to ask me to give up so soon? Hellion Vivian laughed. She crossed her left leg and leaned back, unable to restrain her playboy aura. She said calmly, let's talk about it after Hellion Guangyao summons the hidden army. Su Yenemo laughed coldly. This little bastard really wouldn't give up until she was in front of the grave. Hellion Guangyao did not waste any more time. He shouted towards the crowd, General Qi, are you there? Yes. Amidst the crowd, Qi Yen, who was dressed in pure black, slowly walked towards them. Perhaps it was because he was too handsome. As soon as he revealed his face, all of the women present immediately turned their gazes toward him. Looking at his calm and composed posture, with his long sleeves fluttering in the wind. Only these words seemed to appear in their minds. A peerless young master. This was how it should be. Among the stewards there were also some older ones. Once they saw Qi Yan's appearance they seemed to recall something. You are the emperors. The young master Qi. The young master of the Qi family only had one bloodline. He did not receive the emperor's grace and did not use up the emperor's power. They thought that the Qi family had hidden away in the city, but they did not expect that he would become the leader of the hidden army. The steward was in a daze, but then he remembered that this was how it should be. Back then Old Master saved Qi Yan's life. This kid was probably repaying his kindness. With such a person as the general of the hidden army, wouldn't the hidden army today be even more powerful than it was in the past? When the stewards thought of this they could not help but feel excited. However, no one noticed that Hellion Vivian had maintained her lazy demeanor from the beginning to the end. There was no change in her expression. Behind Qi Yan were 2 other generals. When one of them saw Hellion Vivian he subconsciously wanted to greet her. The other one quickly held his hand and scolded softly, De Xiong. Qi Yan did not need to turn around to know what had happened. It must be that De Xiong, who was not in the right mind, got hot-headed when he saw Hellion Vivian. He seemed to be helpless. His long eyebrows furrowed, but he did not show any other expression. Hellion Guangyao quickly greeted them with a smile. He was also puzzled as to why 3 people came at once. The letter clearly said that General Qi Yan alone was enough. However, Hellion Guangyao was very happy to see the other members of the hidden army. Now he was the rightful successor. Even if that little bastard wanted to snatch it from him, he would not be able to beat him. When he thought of this, Hellion Guangyao's expression could not help but be proud. He looked at Hellion Vivian with a gaze that said, hurry up and give up your seat for me. His voice was cold as he said, Now, you should be convinced of your loss. Convinced? Hellion Vivian switched her legs and smiled. I always forgot to mention that I have prepared a big gift for you and Madame Sue in this clan meeting. Now that I have taken out one of them, it should be just right. As she said this, she glanced at the mercenary beside her. The mercenary quickly passed a stack of envelopes to her. Hellion Wei Wei calmly took it and lazily flipped through it a few times. Her slender fingertips raised as she smiled and said, "This handwriting is actually pretty good. It's just that the content is too earnest and well-intentioned. It makes people who read it only feel that the writer is too hypocritical and want to casually reply with 1 or 2 sentences. Oh, come, let Mr. Guangyao have a look at these letters." After Hellion Vivian said this, the mercenary passed the letters to Hellion Guangyao. Hellion Guangyao wanted to throw them away, but he realized that the large handwriting on the envelopes was unbelievably familiar. This is obviously his handwriting. What the hell? Hellion Guangyao snatched the letters and roughly flipped through them a few times. His dark eyes shook violently. This is a letter that he wrote to the hidden army. How did it appear in her hands? Hellion Guangyao suddenly raised his head and stared at Hellion Vivian. Hellion Wei Wei merely lifted her thin lips and did not even look at him. Instead, she hooked her finger at Qi Yan, who was standing in the distance. Her voice was flat and her posture was languid and calm. Come here. Chapter 452. Yes. Qi Yan's voice was light, but there was a hint of playfulness in it as he walked towards Hellion Vivian. Then he opened his mouth again. His eyes were deep as he said in a low voice, "Young master." After hearing the last 2 words, Hellion Guangyao seemed to have suddenly understood something. His hands gripped the stack of letters tightly as he looked towards Qi Yan. Impossible. This is absolutely impossible. The people in the distance could not hear clearly what was said and had yet to react to what was happening. They were stunned and thought to themselves, wasn't the hidden army summoned by Hellion Guangyao? Why did they go to the Princess Consort's side? What's going on? I'm not sure, could there be any changes? Voices of discussion rang out one after another. Hellion Guangyao's body shook as he did not dare to think about it from his perspective. However, De Xiong could not hold it in any longer. At this time, when he saw Hellion Vivian calling Qi Yan over, he did not say anything and knelt on the ground on one knee. With a whoosh, the hidden army hidden in the crowd moved as well. The scene was so grand that everyone was shocked. Hellion Vivian smiled faintly as she stood up. Hellion Guangyao, what makes you think that my hidden army will listen to your command just because of those letters? De Xiong, tell him why you are here this time. Of course, to assist the young master. The voice was De Xiong's. This shout made everyone burst into an uproar. What did he just call the princess consort? Young master? No way. Could it be that the hidden army has already recognized her as their master? That's impossible. The hidden army has not appeared for a long time. The princess consort couldn't have found them, right? Why is it impossible? Look at those people. Everyone looked back and saw 18 people dressed in black robes, including the mercenaries from before, standing behind Hellion Wei Wei one after another. They all had different postures and were not very handsome, but they emitted a kind of aura that could crush everyone. Really, they really recognized her as their master? The stewards were all stunned and mumbled to themselves as if they could not believe it. The teacups in their hands fell to the ground with a clang. However, Su Yenemo did not believe it. It was impossible for the hidden army to have recognized a master. 2 days ago they were still communicating through letters. How could they recognize that little bastard as their master? It was a lie. This was all a lie. Old master, hurry up and tell them who the hidden army belongs to. Su Yenemo reached out and tugged at Hellion Guangyao's sleeve, her voice urgent and sharp. She, who wholeheartedly wanted Hellion Vivian to suffer the consequences of her own actions, did not notice the paleness on Hellion Guangyao's face. After reading the letter in his hand, Su Yenemo finally understood. Her eyes were filled with astonishment as she muttered, "She was the one who kept replying to our letters? She had already gotten hold of the hidden army before we even contacted them? How is this possible? How is this possible? But these letters, these words. Master, say something, master. What the hell is going on?" The buzzing sound in his ears made Hellion Guangyao's entire body stiffen. He only felt a burst of dizziness. The air in his chest couldn't catch up. His hands trembled and he almost lost his footing. "Old master." Su Yenmo cried out anxiously and quickly supported his body with her hands. Only then did Helian Guangyao not lose his composure. He reached out and pressed his head as if waiting for the dizziness to pass. Seeing him like this, Su Yenmo couldn't hold it in anymore. She looked up at Helian Vivian and reprimanded her. "Vivian, no matter how immature you are, you should understand that he is your father. I know that all these years, you don't see eye to eye with me, that's why you went against your father. I don't care how you treat me, why do you have to make your father angry? If a person doesn't have filial piety, it doesn't matter how capable they are." Su Yenmo's face was full of righteousness, as if she was going to bear all the grievances and didn't care what the outcome was. Helian Vivian was a little bastard who could even lay her hands on her own father. Such a person, no matter how capable she was still trash. Her words naturally caused a commotion. After all, this was ancient times. In ancient times, filial piety was the most important thing. Was Su Yenmo planning to create public opinion to stop her from ascending? Helian Vivian's eyes showed a cold smile, her elegant face curved into an arc. Filial piety? That depends on whether the other party is worth it for me to fulfill that filial piety. As she spoke, she pointed at Helian Guangyao. 7 years ago, my mother was seriously injured and bedridden. What did this trash do? Not only did he cheat on my mother, he even married a mistress. Since you are preaching to me now, I will tell you in return. My mother was a righteous person. What did she do wrong? If he didn't want to stay in the Helian family, he could have packed up and left. Unfortunately, he was greedy to the point where he couldn't even be considered human. In order to get the Helian family, he actually poisoned my mother. No matter if it was my grandfather or my mother, Helian Guangyao was indebted to them for saving his life. I think at that time, my grandfather definitely didn't expect that he would save a heartless thief. You. Helian Guangyao was so angry by Helian Vivian's words that he couldn't even speak. When the stewards found out about this shocking secret, they were all shocked and looked in the direction of Helian Guangyao and Su Yenmo. Su Yenmo was not afraid. At that time, only she and Helian Guangyao were there. Who could prove that they killed someone? Wei, you can't slander your father just to find an excuse for yourself. Su Yenmo also had her own thoughts. No matter what, in this kind of situation she had to put up with it on the surface. The smart Helian Vivian naturally understood that she wanted to offend. She laughed softly and walked over. She turned her face sideways and whispered in Su Yenmo's ear, "Madam Su, why are you in such a hurry to come to a conclusion? My second gift hasn't arrived yet." As soon as she finished speaking, a petite and beautiful figure rushed in from the outside and hugged Helian Guangyao's waist. She looked up at him pitifully. There were still traces of tears on her small face. "Guangyao, are you okay?" Helian Guangyao did not expect Lan Lian to come in and subconsciously wanted to push her away. After all, this was a public place with so many people, such intimate actions were really indecent. However, when he saw the worry in her eyes, his heart ached. He reached out and patted her back, letting out a long sigh. This small face could always evoke his gentleness. "Who is she?" Su Yenmo's voice rang in his ears. It was so sharp that it almost revealed all the viciousness. "Guangyao, tell me clearly, who is she?" She did not expect that at this time, the person in her husband's arms was actually another woman. Chapter 453. Helian Guangyao obviously did not want to explain his private matters in front of so many people. He replied impatiently, "What are you yelling for? We'll talk about it when we get back." Go back? Su Yenmo felt like her head was about to explode, especially when that woman had no intention of letting go. She, who had always been arrogant, could not tolerate this kind of thing. She took a step forward and tried to pry Lan Lian's hand away. Lan Lian shivered as if she was very scared. She curled her shoulders and hid in Helian Guangyao's arms. She said softly, "Guangyao, did I do something wrong?" "Good girl, you didn't do anything wrong." After Helian Guangyao comforted Lan Lian, he raised his eyes and looked at Su Yenmo. "Are you done? Haven't you embarrassed yourself enough today?" He used to be worried that Su Yenmo would find out that he had an affair. What was there to be afraid of now? That old man in the Su family was dying and he would soon take over the Su family. As for this woman, if she was sensible, he would ensure that she had food and clothes. If she was not, she would be left to her own devices. Am I the one who is embarrassing or are you the one who is embarrassing? Look at how old she is. You actually. The more Su Yen Mo spoke, the thinner the air became. She reached out and touched her forehead. The youthful beauty of a young girl was obviously not something she had. The chill that came from her forehead made her lose her usual demeanor completely. She pulled Lan Lian's hair and said, "You little bitch." With Lan Lian's skills, it would have been easy for her to dodge, but she did not. Instead, she followed Su Yen Mo's momentum and fell heavily to the ground. Her small face was pale and colorless. Her fingers covered her lower abdomen as she kept calling out, Guangyao, it hurts." Helian Guangyao's heart ached. He carried Lan Lian in his arms and kicked Su Yenemo viciously. Su Yenemo did not expect him to hit her. When the pain came, blood was already flowing from the corner of her mouth. She clenched her fists and gritted her teeth. "We were married for 7 years. How could you do this to me? I didn't want to do this either." Helian Guangyao did not intend to kick so hard, but seeing that Lan Lian was wronged, he could not help but lose his strength. "Lian Er is pregnant, but you are acting like a shrew, hitting people. If there's anything, let's talk about it when we get home." He had already lost the right to inherit the Helian family, so he couldn't lose face as well. The moment Su Yenemo heard the word pregnant, her chest turned even colder and the chill went straight to her head. You two have been together for a long time. Was it because you kept saying that you were busy? You're actually looking for this little bitch, right? Helian Guangyao, do you still have any humanity? I don't want to waste my breath with you. Helian Guangyao saw that she wouldn't listen no matter what he said, so he simply waved his sleeves and wanted to leave. All the stewards at the clan meeting were dazzled by this turn of events. They looked at Su Yenemo with pity in their eyes. In fact, not many people in the capital did not know that Helian Guangyao had a mistress outside. He was the only one who kept it a secret, and Su Yenemo still foolishly believed him. Little did she know that the Su family had long played Helian Guangyao in the palm of their hand. Helian Guangyao. Su Yenemo slammed her left hand on the ground and shouted at the top of her lungs, "Don't you dare leave. Have you forgotten that without the Helian bloodline you are nothing in the future? The Su family has 100 ways to drive you into a corner." Hearing this, the pity in everyone's eyes became stronger. De Xiong still did not understand what was going on. He scratched his head and called out to Helian Vivian, "Young master? What's this?" Helian Vivian smiled faintly and gave him a handful of sunflower seeds. She held a cup of tea in her hand and said simply, "Watch the show." De Xiong did not understand what was there to watch, but this guy was the same as Little Seven. Having something to eat was a good thing. Hence, he elatedly nudged the mercenaries beside him and whispered, "Quick, give me a seat." Qi Yen was the most cautious person among them, so much so that when he saw the most courageous soldiers of the hidden army squatting in a row at the side and discussing how the plot would progress while eating sunflower seeds, he really wanted to pretend that he did not know this group of people. The scene was clearly not supposed to be like this. They had always been tall and mighty in the hearts of the people, but today there was an unreliable young master. Helian Vivian saw Qi Yen frowning at her and thought that he was dissatisfied that she did not share the sunflower seeds with him. She opened her eyes wide and innocently stretched out her hand. "This is the last handful." "No thank you," Qi Yen said coldly, but the corner of his mouth twitched. He sighed sadly in his heart. It was indeed different from before. Helian Guangyao naturally did not feel good being surrounded like this. He originally did not want to turn around, but who would have thought that Lan Lian, who was in his arms, would speak softly and weakly, "Guangyao, you should stop. If because of me you lose everything, I will feel guilty." Seeing that Helian Guangyao had turned around, Su Yenemo sneered and took a deep breath. Only then did the stifling feeling in her chest dissipate slightly. However, her fingers were trembling uncontrollably. Relying on her self-control, she forced her voice to slow down. "Guangyao, think carefully. Once you step out of this door, you know what you will face." "Are you threatening me?" Helian Guangyao laughed coldly. "All these years, you have been using your Su family to pressure me. Don't forget, if it was not for me, your Su family would not have reached this point. Now that your father is old, let me give you a piece of advice. Be quiet and everyone will live well." Hearing this, Su Yenmo's body shook and her voice was hoarse. "What do you mean?" As she spoke, she rushed towards Helian Guangyao and shook his arm with all her strength. "Tell me clearly, what do you mean?" Guangyao, my head hurts." Lan Lian was shaken until her face turned pale. She reached out and held her forehead, looking like she was in pain. Seeing this, Helian Guangyao flung Su Yan Mo away fiercely, his face full of mockery. Do you still need me to say it clearly? Don't you know what the Su family is like? Your father's position as prime minister has long been taken away. What is there to be arrogant about? Helian Guangyao. Su Yanemo lay on the ground, her fingers clenched so hard that blood flowed out, but she did not notice. Her chest was heaving up and down, she was so angry that she could not say a word. Helian Vivian was done watching the show. She stood up and patted her robe, casually instructing the few people behind her. Take the melon seeds and belts, don't throw them everywhere. Chapter 454. De Xiong had yet to react. Helian Vivian had already walked to Su Yanmo's side. There was a hint of laziness in her mischievous smile. Madame Su, do you still like the present I gave you? Su Yanmo raised her head with a murderous look in her eyes. It's you. You're the one who arranged all of this. Helian Wei did not deny it, but the smile at the corner of her mouth deepened with unprecedented coldness. Su Yanmo, do you think that as long as no one knows about it, the evil deeds you have done are not evil? It's not that the time has yet to come. You and that scumbag joined hands to steal my Helian family's property. You even shamelessly complained about your grievances everywhere, slandering my mother's reputation, causing me to lose my martial chi. Today I'll let you have a taste of what it feels like to have your man stolen by a mistress and your property stolen by your husband. Su Yanmo reached out and grabbed the collar of her shirt, as if that was the only way she could breathe. In the end she could not resist anymore. A mouthful of blood spurted out just like that. However, Wei acted as if she didn't even see this scene. She stood up straight and leisurely brushed away the non-existent dust on her clothes. Su Yanmo's face was ashen as she leaned back. Her fingers stretched forward and struggled for a while before hitting her own chest. Her lips were black as she fell into the dust. Helian Vivian knew that this was a sign of her illness, but it had nothing to do with her. A life for a life, a debt must be repaid. Su Yanmo should have paid the price long ago. Guang. She seemed to want to call Helian Guangyao's name. However, Helian Guangyao did not have her in his eyes. He only wanted to hold Lan Lian in his arms so that she would not make a move and hurt his heart. Su Yanmo looked at the disgusted expression on his face. Her remaining hope was gone. Her eyes were empty as she looked at the foggy sky. It was too similar, almost exactly the same as before. It was just that the person who was held in his arms last time was her. But now it was someone else. At the thought of this, Su Yanmo's last breath was caught in her throat. She could not utter another word. Like a person who was about to drown, she curled up in pain and stopped breathing. When Helian Guangyao saw Su Yanmo in that state, he couldn't help but panic. In his panic, he wanted to escape even more quickly. He said to Lan Lian in a disorderly manner, "She died of anger. It has nothing to do with anyone. Lian let's go now." Lan Lian didn't say anything. Instead, it was Helian Vivian who laughed from behind him. "If you want to leave, you need to make sure that the person you want to take away is willing to go with you." What was the meaning of this? Helian Guangyao abruptly turned his head around. Today's repeated blows had stimulated him to the point that his eyes were red. Unexpectedly, Lan Lian, who was originally in his arms, pushed him away with a cold expression. Then she stood up straight and walked towards Helian Vivian. Seeing this, Helian Guangyao's face was extremely pale. He found it difficult to speak. "Lan Lian, it was His Highness who arranged for me to come into contact with you. Otherwise, do you think I would take a fancy to you based on your age and conduct?" Lan Lian sneered. "Abandoning your wife and child, even a beast is better than you." The muscles on Helian Guangyao's face trembled violently due to anger. "I thought that I treated you well, but you look at me like this. That's why I said you're despicable." Helian Vivian smiled gently. She handsomely put her arm on Lan Lian's shoulder and said viciously, "Starting from my mother, no matter how well the family treated you, you didn't feel that it was enough and even wanted to bite the master. Outside, other people didn't like to talk to you, but you were still despicable and tried to please them every day. I heard that in the beginning, you were the one who pestered Lan Lian and refused to let go. It really suits your despicable style. If you weren't so despicable, these plans would have been difficult to implement." Helian Guangyao only felt a buzzing sound in his head. This made him want to strangle Helian Vivian on the spot. However, he knew that he would only embarrass himself no matter what he did now. He didn't forget how many people were present. If he continued to stay, he was afraid that he would become the joke of the entire capital. He hadn't lost yet, at least he still had the Su family. That's right, he still had the Su family. Helian Guangyao calmed his soaring anger and quickly walked out of the hall of the congregation. Helian Vivian looked at Helian Guangyao, who fled in panic. The corners of her mouth slowly curled up. Lan Lian didn't understand. She whispered, "Why didn't the princess just kill him directly? Don't forget, the Su family still has Prime Minister Su." Helian Vivian smiled faintly. "I don't have any evidence of what Prime Minister Su did in the past. Killing him would only cause trouble for His Highness for no reason." Now that Helian Guangyao has set his sights on the Su family and angered Su Yenemo to death, do you think Prime Minister Su will let him go? De Xiong. That Su Yenemo was angered to death by young master. Helian Vivian ignored the loyal dog's honest gaze. She coughed softly and continued, "Helian Guangyao underestimated Prime Minister Su, that old fox. His return will not be as smooth as he imagined. This kind of infighting will definitely kill one of them." As she spoke, Helian Weiwei turned her head to the side and whispered to the person behind her, "Send General Guangyao off and tell Prime Minister Su about Su Yenmo's death. Let him know that he has a good son-in-law." Lan Lian listened to Helian Vivian's instructions. He had mixed feelings. Until today she finally saw how powerful this person was. Even compared to His Highness, she was not inferior at all. If such a person wanted to mess with her that day, it would be a piece of cake. But she had left herself behind. Lan Lian was shocked. When she looked at Helian Vivian again, there was suddenly something in her eyes that had never been there before. If it was this person, she would be willing to bow down to her. Half an hour later, when the news of Su Yenmo's death reached Prime Minister Su's ears, he almost fainted from anger. He was already ill from kneeling outside the palace in the rain for an entire night. Now that he was so agitated, his pair of old hands could not even hold the teacup properly. Coupled with Helian Guangyao's shameless actions, he felt like he had invited a wolf into the house. Cold sweat rushed to his head. With a wave of his hand, he swept all the medicinal tools on the wooden table onto the floor. In the midst of the chaos, the butler reached out to support him and shouted, "Call the doctor. Quickly call the doctor. Old master, old master. Nothing must happen to you, old master." At this moment, in the inner courtyard of the palace, Beligaju, who had finished reading the memorials, was unbuttoning his outer robe with one hand. He turned his head to the side and listened to the subordinate's report. The corner of his mouth curved into a playful smile. Chapter 455. You should let me say it. The Princess Consort is really smart. Only she could come up with such a plan. Eunuch Sun was also listening at the side, smiling as he poured a cup of tea for Beligaju. Beligaju raised his good-looking eyebrows and said calmly, "She is smart but not ruthless enough." Eunuch Sun was speechless. He thought to himself that this was not ruthless enough. That person from the Su family would not be able to survive this autumn. Something bad would definitely happen to him. However, he really wanted to know what his master would do if it was him. What if it was His Highness? What would he do? Beligaju casually threw away the outer garment in his hand and loosened his collar. He said casually, "Send Su Yenmo's corpse directly to Prime Minister Su." Eunuch Sun was speechless. Prime Minister Su would have straightened his legs. In terms of infuriating people, the Princess Consort was indeed not as shameless as his master. Beligaju did not seem to notice his gaze. He turned sideways and draped the outer garment over his shoulders. He stood tall and straight, looking radiant. "Prepare the carriage, we are leaving the palace." Leaving the palace? Eunuch Sun quickly followed, not knowing why His Highness suddenly wanted to leave the palace. When Beligaju walked outside, he stopped in his tracks. His gaze swept across the flowers in the imperial garden indifferently. He seemed to have paused in his tracks. After a while, he turned his head and asked Eunuch Sun, "Where are the roses in the palace?" Eunuch Sun could not keep up with His Highness's pace today. "What roses?" Little Seventh Prince popped out from the side with a goldfish in his mouth. His words were a little muffled, but his face was fierce. "Third brother, are you looking for roses?" Yes. Beligaju glanced at him. You know, little seventh prince touched his bald head. Third sister-in-law gave you some last time. Don't you still have a lot of them in the palace? Those won't do. Beligaju rejected him calmly without explaining why. Little seventh prince knew that his third brother treasured those roses like they were precious. But roses in other places. Oh, my little ancestor. At this moment Eunuch's son seemed to have regained his senses. He grabbed the little one and said, "How can you eat fish like this? This was a child. Your Highness, why don't you scold the seventh Highness? If he eats it raw, what will happen to his body?" The little seventh prince ignored Eunuch's son's obstruction and continued to hold the beautiful goldfish in his mouth. Eunuch's son immediately felt mentally and physically exhausted. Until Beligaju looked at the little one and said, "Open your mouth." Only then did little seventh prince spit out the goldfish into Eunuch's son's hand. He was very reluctant to part with it. Eunuch's son quickly let go of the goldfish that was still alive in his hand, in case the little seventh prince couldn't help but take it back. How did the chefs in the imperial kitchen serve the seventh prince? How did they starve him to this extent? The chefs felt so wrong that they wanted to vomit blood. They howled in their hearts. It was obviously the seventh prince who ate whatever he saw. What did it have to do with them? In fact, it really had nothing to do with the imperial kitchen. A long time ago, Beligaju knew that his little brother had a huge appetite. He specifically asked the imperial kitchen to watch over him 24 hours a day and prepare 12 meals a day, in case the little one got hungry. If one had to compare the seventh prince's appetite, other people's afternoon tea was a piece of cake and a few candied fruits. His little seventh prince ate 10 meat buns and a plate of side dishes. The cakes and whatnot were only used to grind his teeth. Originally, they thought that with such preparations, the little seventh prince would definitely not eat the goldfish in the pond. The Grand Emperor had asked several times why the number of goldfish he raised was always decreasing. Each time, they were speechless and could only continuously add more food for the little seventh prince. Add more food. Unexpectedly, he didn't even let go of the last goldfish in the pond. Eunuch's son heaved a long sigh. The little one didn't feel discouraged even though he didn't have food to eat. He followed behind Beligaju. His small head could only reach Beligaju's thigh. He had a strong and dignified aura, as if he would bite anyone who came close. He was very domineering and ferocious. With his presence, ordinary things wouldn't dare to come close. Eunuch's son was relieved and quietly went to prepare the carriage for the two masters. This time it wasn't only His Highness who was going out of the palace. There must be more food in the carriage. Yes, 20 meat buns would be enough. He didn't know if the imperial kitchen could spare the time to make it. "Third brother, why do you insist on roses?" The little one tugged at Beligaju's clothes and tried his best to keep up with him. Beligaju answered casually, "For your third sister-in-law." He didn't know what roses meant, but he saw that she often flipped through the Chasing a Wife handbook. Roses should be the best choice. When the little seventh prince heard that it was for Hellion Vivian, his little face became serious. "Third brother, I think you should give third sister-in-law something more practical. For example, the pair of red-crowned cranes in Imperial Grandfather's courtyard. They must be delicious." Eunuch's son was speechless. Why did he hear that the seventh prince was thinking about the retired emperor's favorite red-crowned cranes when he came back? "Little master, if you continue to eat like this, the retired emperor will definitely not be able to take it and throw you back to the White Academy again." Red-crowned cranes? Beligaju stood still as if he was thinking. Eunuch's son's eyes suddenly widened. "Oh, it can't be, no." Beligaju continued. "Third sister-in-law found the things I gave her strange." Eunuch's son was relieved. Fortunately, the little seventh prince's tiger eyes lit up. What did third brother give third sister-in-law? He wanted it too. "Color." Just 2 words made Eunuch's son and the little one petrified in the wind. The old and the little one looked at each other. Eunuch's son sighed and held the little seventh prince's hand. "Little master, in the future, this servant will not say that you are strange when you give people things. In the future, if you see a girl you like, you should give her food." Giving food was better than giving a necklace. That was the rhythm of being rejected at any moment. The little seventh prince put on a handsome face and said, "Don't worry, Eunuch's son, compared to third brother I'm still normal. The imperial kitchen chef who came to deliver the meat buns." "How are you normal? Go and ask which family's child eats by the basket." Beligaju ignored the noise behind him and turned to the west side of the imperial garden, only to see a few dozen roses. Eunuch's son originally wanted to call the gardener who took care of these roses so that he could pick flowers for his highness. Before he could open his mouth, he saw a white robe fluttering in front of him, followed by a sweet fragrance. Beligaju, who was standing in the middle of the flowers, had a big bouquet of blooming roses in his hand. He held it with one hand, his long robe fluttering. His figure was as noble as jade, so handsome that people couldn't take their eyes off him. Chapter 456. At this moment Hellion Vivian was still in the house. She did not know that the royal family was planning to give her roses. Her eyes scanned the surroundings, cold and capable. The stewards were also astute. When they saw that Hellion Guangyao's power was gone, they stood up one by one and shouted that the Hellion family had a successor. This was the prosperity of the family. Hellion Vivian did not buy their words. She understood that these people could be used but could not be trusted. She sat on the main seat with a faint smile. Everyone knows that I have never participated in the clan meeting, so I don't know much about the affairs of the family. Before Hellion Vivian could finish, someone started to express his loyalty. Eldest miss, don't worry. With us here everything will be fine. Yes, we are here. Eldest miss, you don't have to worry. Another person spoke. Hellion Vivian glanced at the two stewards. Her smile did not diminish. If that is the case, then I would like to ask all of you to explain the properties that you are in charge of now. Hearing Hellion Vivian's words, most of the stewards' smiles were a little stiff. They did not expect that an inexperienced child would take them down so easily the moment she took over. What was the difference between asking them to hand over their properties and revealing all of their secrets? The stewards looked at each other, wishing that they did not respond to Hellion Vivian's words just now. However, Hellion Vivian seemed to have prepared everything long ago. She instructed the people beside her, distribute the paper and pens to the stewards, so that they do not miss anything. She meant that there was no way to fool this issue. The stewards gritted their teeth and regretted for no reason. If they had known this would happen, they would not have chosen such a demon god for the sake of money. This Hellion Vivian looked lazy and harmless, but in fact they did not know what was wrong with her. She always made them feel uneasy. But even so, they would never agree to anything that would affect their interests. Eldest miss. A steward stood up. He had a big belly and a fierce look on his face. If you restrict us like this, how are we going to do anything in the future? Hellion Vivian smiled, but the smile did not reach her eyes. Limit? I just want to know what you guys are doing. What restrictions are there? Aren't you restricting us by making us write down our properties? The steward spoke passionately. The people below also began to show signs of wanting to stir up trouble. Hellion Vivian calmly put down the teacup in her hand. Big Bear, Old Eagle, let Steward Wang understand my rules. No one understood the meaning of this sentence. A cracking sound could be heard. There were two people standing behind Steward Wang. Each of them was holding a long pipe that was as tall as a person. It looked like a weapon. Just looking at it was a bit scary. Yes. It was a simple word. Manager Wang was kicked more than a meter away by one of them. The stewards who wanted to resist all froze and looked at Hellion Vivian with different thoughts. Hellion Wei was all smiles as she said, unless I'm forced into a corner, otherwise I'm a person who really doesn't like to fight and kill. Therefore I hope that everyone can be more reasonable. The stewards paused and returned to their original seats. How could they forget that she had already been recognized as the master of the hidden army? In the future, whatever they wanted to do, they would have to consider whether they had the life to bear the consequences. For some reason at that moment, the people saw the shadow of the old man who used the dragon-headed walking stick to give orders in Hellion Vivian. An inexplicable sense of oppression and guilt made their foreheads covered with a layer of sweat. After all, there were not many people who were worthy of old Master Hellien's nurturing. At this moment they finally understood the meaning of the hidden army standing here. Hellion Vivian was showing her power. She was telling them to restrain themselves and I'll spare their lives. If they don't, I'll take their lives. The back of the confidant who followed Hellion Guangyao was drenched in cold sweat. He trembled as he wrote down the properties under his jurisdiction on the piece of paper. Hellion Vivian looked at the paper that was collected and tapped her fingers twice in satisfaction. She was still polite and said, "Very good. I believe that with everyone's cooperation, the Hellion family will develop better. It's all thanks to eldest young Mrs. Wisdom. The stewards forced a smile on their faces despite their bitterness. Hellion Vivian glanced at Xiong and the rest and said in a calm voice, "You can put away your guns now." Another sound rang out. The stewards were alarmed, but they were not completely convinced. Even if Hellion Vivian became the clan leader, she did not have any reputation in the imperial court. A newly appointed clan leader without any scholarly achievements must show some results within a month to prove her ability to everyone. Otherwise, she would still be stripped of her position as the clan leader. If she went overboard, there would naturally be people who would deal with her. They were not in a hurry. They just had to behave during this period of time and sit back and watch the show. There would be a day when Hellion Vivian would turn around and say good things about them. After all, she was still young and impulsive. Even if she had the hidden army's protection, she might not be able to go far. These people are not convinced by you. Qi Yan looked at the stewards who left respectfully and his eyes lit up. Hellion Wei Wei carelessly propped up the side of her face with one hand and flipped through the rules of the family tree with the other. She smiled mischievously. They think that I don't have scholarly honors and won't last more than a month. It seems that I have to think of a way to become an official first. Qi Yan's deep eyes swept across her face and finally landed on her neck. Hellion Vivian thought that there was another mark on her neck and subconsciously reached out to cover it. He heard Scarlet Flame say, "You've really changed." Hellion Vivian felt that this was not a safe topic. Qi Yan was very smart and very loyal to old Master Hellion. If he found out that she was not the real Hellion Vivian, the result would be very difficult to control. People change. Hellion Vivian wanted to change the topic. Qi Yan casually dropped a bomb. "Is this why you have forgotten that you once liked me?" "Who? Liked who?" Hellion Vivian was stunned. "Didn't the Hellion Vivian in the past marry only Murong Chongfeng? Seems that you really don't remember." Qi Yan took a sip of tea and said slowly, "However, before you found the hidden army, I saved you twice. The first time was during the Flower Appreciation Festival. You were almost molested." Hearing these words, Hellion Wei Wei's soul vaguely shook violently for a moment. She seemed to have a certain image in her mind. She stood under the flowery countenance tree, looking at the back of a person leaving. She only felt that even her heart was aching. Chapter 457. In order to cover up the pain, she wanted to marry Murong Chongfeng as soon as possible. Gradually, as time passed, she chose to forget the man who made her feel a sharp pain every time she thought of him, just like how she chose to forget the truth about her biological mother's death. Her memories became clearer and clearer, to the point that she didn't see the figure walking towards her. Instead, many people turned their heads in the direction of the commotion, their eyes filled with shock. Bailey Jiaju merely had an indifferent expression on his face as he held the rose in his hand. His tall and slender figure stood straight as his gaze fell upon the body of the man standing opposite of Wei Wei. His deep eyes deepened without warning. Hellion Vivian's hands and feet were a little stiff, as if she couldn't control her own body. Her fingers tightened slightly to suppress the dizziness. Vivian. When Hellion Vivian thought of those things, she always felt a sense of detachment. If it wasn't for the familiar voice calling her in time, she would have floated away. She stabilized that feeling, regained control of her own body, and tilted her head to look to the left. The red roses in His Highness' arms had an indescribable flirtatiousness, and it was extremely beautiful. But why did he carry the flowers here? Also, he seemed a little unhappy. Before Hellion Wei Wei could open her mouth, a certain someone had already put his arm around her waist and put the flowers in her hand with a smile that was not a smile. Hellion Vivian raised her eyebrows again. His Highness was the most unpredictable when he was like this. She had to say something. "For me." "Yes. The roses are very pretty, I like them very much." In any case, she had to appease him first. Bailey Jiaju glanced at her, tilted his body, and used his slender fingers to tuck her hair behind her ear. His voice was deep and wicked as he said, "Then think carefully about how to repay me later." Hellion Vivian's hands that were fiddling with the roses were a little stiff, and the tips of her ears were red. Seeing her like this, the coldness in Beligaju's eyes dissipated a little. "The congregation should be over. When are you leaving? Are you here to pick me up?" Hellion Vivian was so happy that a smile appeared on her face. We can leave now. After we return to the palace, I have something to discuss with Imperial Grandfather. As she spoke, Hellion Vivian turned her head and looked at Qi Yen. Thank you, General Qi, for your help. I hope General Qi will forget what I said in the past that offended you. I was young back then, so it was inevitable that my imagination would run wild. Scarlet Flame looked at her, his eyes as deep as water as he slowly said, I don't think it's offensive. But what does this mean? How was she supposed to answer? Hellion Wei Wei subconsciously looked toward Bailey Jiaju. His side profile was so handsome that it could steal other people's breaths at any time. The smile on his face became even wider. Hellion Vivian didn't think that it was happiness. A person like His Highness wouldn't smile like that when he was truly happy. As expected, Baligaju hugged her tighter, but his eyes were still looking at Scarlet Flame. He said with a smile, don't think so much in the future so that others won't take it seriously. It'll be troublesome to deal with it. Don't you agree, young Master Qi? Little Seventh Prince listened at the side and thought to himself, Third Brother's poisonous tongue seems to have become more powerful. I must be obedient in the future, or else he will definitely teach me a lesson. As expected, Scarlet Flame's eyes froze. He didn't say anything but looked at Baligaju with his deep black eyes, neither servile nor overbearing. Hellion Vivian inexplicably felt the smell of gunpowder. Look at this, then look at that. Baligaju didn't give her a chance to think it through. He said in a low voice, didn't you have something to discuss with Imperial Grandfather? Go back early, he needs to rest later. Hellion Vivian's EQ was low to begin with, and the fact that her soul was unstable just now had a big impact on her. She felt that she needed to eat a piece of osmanthus cake to digest it, so she asked, which carriage did you come in? Baligaju raised his eyebrows. He didn't understand why she would change the topic to this. My carriage. Oh, that's good. Your carriage is big, so I have a lot of boxes of snacks. Little Seventh Prince and I will be able to eat later. Hellion Vivian said what was on her mind. The corner of Scarlet Flame's mouth twitched. Was this the result of hearing about this matter? However, Bailey Jiaju was very satisfied with his own praise dullness in certain aspects. He laughed in a low voice and said, those boxes of yours, I've asked people to help you fill them with refreshments and preserved fruits. There's new tea in the carriage, you can drink some in a while. Hellion Vivian replied with a smile, fully enjoying the benefits of having a sugar daddy. Little Seventh Prince silently mourned for Scarlet Flame, then followed his third brother and third sister-in-law away. When Baligaju hugged Hellion Vivian, she didn't know why, but she couldn't help but look back at Scarlet Flame, who was standing behind her. The person who was known as the jade-like young master didn't change his posture, but his head was hanging down, faintly revealing a sense of loneliness. What? You don't want to leave? Baligaju slowly clenched his other hand. He smiled, but a layer of black fog was brewing in his eyes. Hellion Vivian shook off that strange feeling and her eyes sparkled. I want to leave. Then don't look back. Bailey Jiaju would never tell her how panicked he felt when he saw the way she looked at Qi Yen when he walked in just now. That's right. It was panic. He really couldn't imagine it. There was a day when his prey stopped looking at him and looked at someone else. What would he do? Perhaps he would personally break her arms and legs so that she couldn't go anywhere. Or perhaps he would kill everyone. In short, he would do anything to prevent her from leaving. Even if it meant becoming a demon. Waves of clouds surged in from the west. Hellion Vivian didn't understand why the sky suddenly turned dark, but she found that the hands holding her were exceptionally cold. Without thinking, she directly put them to her lips, blew a breath and raised her head. Next time you go out, wear more clothes. The temperature difference is so big now. How do these people serve you? They don't even know to let you wear a coat. A warm feeling spread from the tip of his finger to the depths of his heart, driving away the darkness in his eyes. Before Baligaju realized it, the corners of his mouth had already curled up. I know. Why are you so long-winded? You're the same as Eunuch Sunday. Wait a minute. Hellion Vivian felt that at this time, she had to say some sweet words, and immediately flipped through her wife-chasing manual. Then she smiled very gently. Even if I'm long-winded, I'm only long-winded to you. That's right. The domineering CEOs in novels would usually use this method to completely conquer the person who belonged to them. Little Seventh Prince. He really couldn't bear to look at it. It was really hard for third brother to find someone like his third sister-in-law. You're tuning in to the Biao's Wuxia Chronicles YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.